He was the world champion of speedruns. Every glitch, every shortcut, every frame, mastered. But one day he woke up inside the game he'd conquered 1,000 times. What he once played for records, he now plays to survive. Now in a brutal world of monsters and dungeons, his only weapon is speed itself. What happens when a gamer plays for his life and every second counts? Let's find out. The story begins in Tokyo. A huge crowd of fans watches the game on the big screen. The climax, the battle with the final boss. The player frantically presses the buttons on the gamepad. The last glitch. Beads of sweat roll down the player's face. His teeth are clenched in nervousness. His fingers were slipping off the buttons, and now he's finished the game. The current record is 25 minutes and 56 seconds. That was an incredible result. Exactly 25 minutes, a new world record by a wide margin. Emperor of the RTA world, slave of a great corporation. Another verse, the world's first RTA speedrunner, goes by the pseudonym Corporate Slave. RTA, or Real-Time Attack, is a gameplay run from start to finish, a competition to see who can complete it the fastest by any means necessary. It's essential to utilize complex mechanics, such as running along unwalkable railings, walking through walls, skipping cutscenes by restarting, or continuing the game from the menu. A glitch is the use of a bug that helps shave time. The average completion time is about 100 hours. This is a very intense action RPG. It was hard to believe that the day had come when the game was completed in 25 minutes, but the main character managed it. The host was interviewing the protagonist and asked about his accomplishments, even the most difficult glitches. But no one expected anything less from a corporate slave. Shachiku was embarrassed. He asked not to exaggerate his accomplishments. He was always on stream with practice runs. Even though he was terrible at explaining glitches, everyone watched and supported him. Competitors and critics shared their opinions, which was very helpful. The host asked if the protagonist planned to treat himself somehow when he got home. Shachiku replied that, on his boss's orders, he would still go to work today. The host said it was a fitting end to the RTA summit and thanked the protagonist. The host suggested meeting in 6 months. The protagonist was sitting at home and reading all the comments. Someone wrote that he hadn't done the final glitch at the end. Shachiku stared at the monitors thinking about something. He was trying to beat the same game over and over again. No matter how many thousands of times he tried, he couldn't repeat the last glitch with a success rate higher than 30%. He still had 30 seconds left, but he persistently searched for a way to shave more time. He tried to pass through the wall at the beginning of the game, and then even more smoothly. There was a pile of empty energy drink cans on the table. The protagonist caught himself thinking that he wanted to sleep. He fell asleep while sitting in a chair with a gamepad in his hands. When he opened his eyes, he had no idea where he was or what was happening. He saw stars in space in front of him. He saw Earth from the depths of the galaxy. He understood that this happens once every 100 years. When the stars align like this, he flew through the darkness. He heard the call of the Earth Goddess. She prayed to bless his lost soul and allow him to reach her through the darkness. Shachiku found himself in a columned hall, just like in the game. He looked up thoughtfully. Someone was watching the hero from above the hall and said that they had succeeded. The protagonist didn't understand what this place was. The people standing in the hall declared it a miracle. The great summoning occurs once every 100 years. They praised the goddess of space. She asked her subordinates to inform the residents of the royal capital of the successful summoning. She was surprised that Shachiku didn't look as brave as she had imagined. She said that at this rate, they wouldn't be able to challenge the demon for another 5 years, even with the fate of the world hanging in the balance. She called out to the hero and announced that she was the queen of this country, the holy savior Ada. She asked the hero summoned from space once every 100 years to share his power with the local people. There is a source of evil from which monsters are born. This source is protected by the evil king Apocalypse and 4 demonic minions. If the source of evil is not sealed, the enslavement of the human world is only a matter of time. Ida said that the protagonist is the last hope. With his power, they must defeat the demon. Ida bowed her head before the protagonist. Shachiku tried to understand what was happening. He remembered it was the first cutscene in another verse. That scene was closer to his heart than his mother. He thought about how he'd been playing AV too much. The savior queen, Ida, held a sword and said it had been passed down from generation to generation. It was a sacred sword that purifies evil. The protagonist was sure he was dreaming about playing AV, but he thought about how the game usually plays in third person. Why was he now seeing everything in first person? He saw the world as if through virtual reality goggles. This is possible if you select first-person mode in the settings, but the protagonist is someone who hates camera shake and always plays in third person. Nevertheless, he moved his arms and legs as if he were in reality. The protagonist was amazed at the quality of the dream, as if he were completely immersed in the game. The protagonist thought that if he could play so comfortably, then all he had to do was speedrun. Ida told him to take that sacred sword and defeat evil, but the protagonist didn't let her finish, turned around and ran toward the wall. He asked her to wait. Ida shouted for the guards to stop the hero, but the protagonist ran and passed through the wall. Eda was shocked that Shachiku could pass through the wall. The protagonist ran, thinking that he should forget about the sacred sword and escape the castle through the wall. He decided to commentate everything. even when he was alone and not streaming. He knew that bosses could be defeated without the sacred sword, and there would be no need to complete the event that taught how to use the sacred sword. She didn't understand what had just happened and ordered them to find the hero. She asked them to give the sacred sword to the hero. Ada stood in the hall, completely confused. A cat girl named Dania ran after the hero. She was Princess Eda's temporary representative in this world. She held a sword in her hands and tried to catch up with the hero. The protagonist ran through the royal capital of Falshura. A young man appears on the hero's path. It's Jen, the owner of the capital's Adventurers Guild. Jen approaches the hero and says that since the stranger is new, he can show them the way around the capital. But Shachiku doesn't listen, instead using force again and jumping over Jen. The protagonist says he's not interested, says goodbye, and runs on. Jen stands there with his mouth wide open. Shachiku explains that this was one of the most difficult skips in the early stages of the game, Gen-senpai's skip. If you encounter Gen-senpai, he starts a tutorial dialogue where he guides the hero around the city. But if you time your wall bounce well, you can skip the tutorial entirely. The timing in the game is very strict. Many new RTA speedrunners get stuck here. Gen-Paizen, who has an older brother's skin, is popular among players. If you make mistakes on stream, you'll get negative comments. If you get to Jen, you could lose 4 minutes, and in an RTA speedrun, that's especially unbearable. Denia ran up to Jen and asked him if he'd seen a boy running along the path from the castle. Jen replied that the boy had gone to the north gate. Denia thought that without the sacred sword, the protagonist was unarmed. A hero who had been painfully summoned once every 100 years shouldn't die so easily. Jen stood there, upset, and asked if he was really that bad. He said it was the first time he'd been ignored like that. Does he look like a recruiter for some strange cult? Denia agreed and added that she was in a hurry. The protagonist said he was going through the first dungeon and the Forest of the Dead, where zombies were rising. But first, he needed to undress. At that moment, Denia caught up with the hero and watched him from the bushes. The protagonist began to take off all his clothes. Denia was surprised. She couldn't understand why Shachiku wasn't even shy. The protagonist said he needed a stick and now he could jump into a crowd of zombies. Denia was shocked. She couldn't understand what he was thinking. Against a crowd of zombies with just a stick in his hand and naked. One of the zombies came up behind him and bit him on the neck. The rest of the zombies followed suit. They surrounded the hero and bit his body. Denia thought that this didn't look like a zombie victory, but like a hero's self-willed end. She couldn't stand by and watch. Denia decided to use force. But at that moment, she noticed that all the zombies had fallen to the ground, and the protagonist was standing there, holding a stick in his hand. He said that enough damage had now been taken. The protagonist started running again, but Denia tried to stop him. She said she was Princess Ada's legal representative, and told him he'd forgotten the sacred sword. She said Shachiku would die with such wounds. She asked for a chance to heal the protagonist with magic, but he ran off into the distance again. He shouted that he'd make it. The protagonist ran through the forest and thought about how this speedrun was being done on easy mode. This mode can be selected at the beginning of the game. The lower the player's power level in the Forest of the Dead, the weaker all the enemies, including bosses. In RTA, the player must avoid taking damage until the last moment. AV is a game for everyone. The protagonist said that shirts and pants provide protection, so they must take off their clothes in the forest. Denia was running after the protagonist, asking for a chance to heal him. Shachiku turned around and realized it was Denia, chasing him to heal him. He said Denia was an NPC in the game's symbol, always nearby and helping the protagonist. But for the speedrunner, she's an enemy. The protagonist decided to run away from her from the forest at full speed. Denia called him names and mumbled that she had to heal him. At the castle, Shachiku allowed Denia to heal him and thanked her. Denia said that before going further, he needed to prepare properly. Otherwise death would surely follow. This castle was inhabited by one of the heavenly rulers, the puppeteer Arachne, but the protagonist didn't listen to her to the end and ran forward again. He wondered if Denia's lines had changed slightly. Perhaps it was because he was asleep? The protagonist stood before a huge spider. Denia knew that this spider was the puppet of the Queen of Evil. She screamed. What was Shachiku thinking when he walked towards her naked? Denia shouted at the protagonist to run away quickly, but the protagonist was moving back and forth in front of the spider. Denia didn't understand what Shachiku was doing, but the protagonist began striking the spider with a stick. Denia was surprised that the protagonist was swinging the stick so hard, but the spider was torn in two. Shachiku said the stick was a glitch and was called a strange stick. If you attack a minor boss with it at a certain point, the stick's damage multiplies to 1240 and stays at that level. The sacred sword, however, only deals 600 damage. It's simply useless. The protagonist said the stick was a cheat item, and there was a chance the bug might be fixed in future updates. He asked the chat to pay attention. Denia stared at him, confused. The protagonist said the minor boss dropped a potion that boosted attack power. He said he was extremely lucky because the potion had a low drop rate. Next on the path was the castle's mid-boss, Arachne. Arachne asked if he really was the Shachiku from another world. Arachne was the demon queen, the first of the 4 heavenly sovereigns. She said she really wanted to make a high-quality doll out of a man from another world. She wondered if she could do it. The protagonist replied that even the demon king couldn't defeat him. Arachne said that Shachiku would become her puppet, but the protagonist had other plans and decided to skip this boss battle and pass through the wall. Denia was shocked. She stood silently before Arachne. The demon queen looked at her thoughtfully. She asked where the protagonist had gone. One of her dolls replied that Shachiku had passed through the wall. Arachne screamed that she had figured it out herself. She shouted for the servants to find this defective one. She kept repeating, "Find him, find him, find him." She shouted that the protagonist from another world would be hers. Denia walked up to the wall and touched it. The wall was indeed missing, and she passed through it. Denia was delighted that she'd succeeded. The protagonist ran through the castle corridors, arguing that with the most powerful staff in hand, he could ignore the other 3 heavenly rulers and go straight to the final boss. The protagonist knew there was a stupid texture glitch behind the wall. You could reach the deepest part of the dungeon by jumping off a cliff. The game is fun, and moments like these make it even better. The fall kill trigger was supposed to be triggered at the bottom, but there was one point where you could just skip past it. Denia asked the protagonist where he was going. She told him that everything Shachiku did was nonsense. She said he had to defeat the demons because he was a hero from another world. She burst into tears and said that as a hero, he had to save this world as befits him. The protagonist replied that fighting a mid-level boss is not necessary to complete the game, a category in which the necessary condition for completing the game is directly achieving the ending. Achievements, clearing dungeons, and collecting items do not affect the result. According to the 80% rules, only time loss is counted. Shachiku looked at Denia and said, "That's why he is the fastest in the world and he will defeat the Demon King." He announced that he had finally arrived at the right place. He jumped off the cliff and said that from here, they would reach the battle with the main boss. Denia stood at the top and looked down. She braced herself and jumped after the protagonist. As the protagonist fell, he thought that now was an important time to rest his fingers. During the fall, he used a power-up potion. Shachiku caught himself thinking the potion wasn't tasty, but so far everything was going well. The protagonist reflected on how he'd skipped with Jen and the strange stick, and even in first person, everything was working out well. There was a great sense of immersion in the game. Even in front of the NPCs, he was trying to act cool. Maybe he should break his record? Although he was in a dream where there was no point in setting a record that no one else had timed. Shachiku thought about how he was in VR and wanted to take the day off tomorrow instead of working. As soon as he woke up, he'd start speedrunning. He'd beat the game faster than anyone else again, even faster than his previous best. Ahead of him was the Demon King Apocalypse. The protagonist said he'd beat him without making any mistakes this time. The Demon King said he recognized the protagonist from another world, a human form unfamiliar to him. The king said he'd honor the protagonist with his purification. The protagonist decided to skip the Demon King's dialogue and hit him with a stick. The protagonist said there weren't many tricks in the first stage of the final boss fight. You just had to avoid the tentacles and hit him 3 times with a strange stick, but the final boss was tough. The speedrunner had a very strong attack, but no health at all. Shachiku could die from one hit. The protagonist boldly but carefully struck the Demon King's skull with the stick, because if the Demon King didn't hit him, then everything had gone perfectly. Denia watched the protagonist and thought he was too strong. He had left the castle less than 30 minutes ago, yet he was stronger than the Demon King himself. The protagonist deftly dodged the Demon King's tentacles. Denia watched the protagonist in horror. She knew he was from another world. He is the real hero. The protagonist struck the Demon King with the stick a 3rd time. The Demon King's skull and cloak began to burn. Denia rejoiced and said the protagonist had won. The protagonist replied that it was too early to celebrate. The second phase of the battle began. The first phase was more difficult, but in the second phase, the king could strike 4 times with his tentacles or fire a beam. When the boss began to fall, you could damage him by hitting the core on his head. During a normal playthrough, Shachiku used exactly this strategy. Denia thought the protagonist was talking nonsense, as before. The protagonist said it was a speedrun and there was a difficult glitch for it. It was the corporate slave's leg. Denia asked again, "The corporate slave's leg?" The protagonist replied that it was a glitch he had discovered himself. Denia was confused. Shachiku remembered that he had failed the last glitch at the summit. He thought the cutscene would soon end and he would fail this cutscene again. The protagonist said that the Demon King attacks randomly. This glitch relies entirely on luck. He asked Denia to pray for him. Denia asked again, "Pray?" This is a phrase used to ask fans for support during random events. The Demon King called the hero a pathetic human and struck him with a tentacle. The protagonist jumped to the side. He thought it was a vertical surprise attack. If the next attack was horizontal, he would need to rotate his skip. The Demon King used a beam attack. Denia stood aside and began to pray. The protagonist cursed and thought it was a surprise attack in a cutscene. Shachiku was a little confused because the attack pattern suddenly changed to horizontal. The protagonist was surprised. Was it because Denia prayed that the attack pattern stabilized? He thought that when he woke up, he would definitely write about this to the AV community. In any case, Shachiku was winning for now. The protagonist accelerated and attempted to run along the wall. Denia watched the action with one eye. The protagonist realized that the vine was angled toward the surface of the polygon, making it possible to run along it. Now the main show began. A small portion of the falling debris could be stepped on. Some of it was just a pixel wide. The angle and timing had to be perfect to hit the core on the head. Shachiku hung on one of the vines, calculating the right angle of attack. Then the protagonist pushed off the wall with the vine and attempted to jump onto the fragment. Pushing off the fragment, he struck the corporate slave's leg. Then the protagonist struck the core on the Demon King's head with a stick. The king screamed that he would not forgive the protagonist. The king gradually began to collapse and crumble. Denia froze at the sight. She remarked that a hero from another world was magnificent and had accomplished his task. The protagonist thought that the final cutscene was about to begin. Denia's true identity was Princess Ida. Ida, in her true form, would seal the source guarded by the Demon King, and this would bring eternal peace to this world. The protagonist felt a sense of satisfaction. He had cleared AV in the any % category. He performed his trick and set a new record in 24 minutes. This playthrough can be considered the fastest so far. However, with the addition of the stick, Shachiku was able to gain more time. He also discovered a trick with Denia's prayer that allowed him to reduce the time by at least a second. The protagonist wondered why the final cutscene hadn't started. Denia had said she wasn't transforming back into Ida. The protagonist was surprised. Denia had said that Ida's power was holy power. The protagonist thought about Denia not being able to return to Ida's body. He was worried that the final cutscene hadn't started. Denia burst into tears. She said the Demon King had been defeated, but something was wrong. Shachiku wondered why the game doesn't end after defeating the last boss, and what's more, the protagonist couldn't exit the AV world. The timer stopped at 24 minutes and 54 seconds. The Kingdom of Falshura, a tailor's shop. The salesperson greeted Denia politely and asked what she thought of the skirt he offered her. Denia replied that she wouldn't be shopping. The naked protagonist emerged from the shop wall and greeted the tailor. Our hero from another world is named Shachiku. The tailor was startled. A little later, at the diner, Denia asked how much longer he would mumble. Shachiku sat there, counting up his points. Adventurer's shirt, defense +5. Adventurer's pants, defense +5. Adventurer's boots, defense +5. Denia asked the protagonist not to act so suspiciously in the royal capital. Shachiku replied that he wanted to become normal, but didn't understand what was stopping him. Denia asked him to tell her everything. The protagonist looked around, but Denia assured him that no one could overhear their conversation here. After the game's unexpected lack of an ending, he struggled to explain what had happened. He explained that he hadn't done it on purpose before. A bug prevented him from passing through the atelier doors, but he knew there was an invisible wall there. If you continue playing after exploiting certain bugs, you can't enter certain buildings through the doors. Shachiku said they talked about this at an AV gaming conference. He found it amusing that he could pass through walls and that it wasn't a problem. Denia replied that it was no problem at all. She called it stupid skill, the so-called glitch technique. The protagonist thought he had explained to Denia that another verse existed and that he knew it well. He wasn't sure she'd understand everything. Denia replied that to believe the protagonist, one would have to be completely insane, but she couldn't deny what she'd seen with her own eyes. Denia tried to reason that the bug technique was simply a technique similar to magic. She couldn't say for sure whether it was a magical spirit or magical protection, so it definitely wasn't magic. This technique wasn't connected to the logic of the world. Rather, it could be called an otherworldly dimension. Denia asked about the fact that she couldn't return to Princess Ada's form because someone had used the bug technique to defeat the Demon King. Shachiku thought Denia was very observant. He replied that he was 100% sure he was dreaming the whole thing. The bug with the sudden appearance of the stranger, the bug with the line. The protagonist admitted that he'd heard that if you defeat the Demon King with a bug, the ending cutscene freezes. But until that moment, no matter how many thousands of times Shachiku had played the game, he'd never heard of a bug preventing him from transforming back. The bug he always exploited shouldn't have led to such consequences. The bug preventing him from going through doors was expected, but the bug preventing him from transforming back was something new. It most likely wasn't his fault. He swore to Denia that it was true. Denia replied that if it was all true, then her return to being a princess should also be beyond expectations, so there had to be an unconventional solution. Shachiku said he had one suggestion for the game's true ending. The game ends after defeating the Demon King. That's the normal ending. Denia continued, wondering if this ending malfunctioned because of a bug. The protagonist replied that perhaps that was the reason. He needed to defeat all 4 heavenly overlords and fulfill a few more conditions to reach the game's true ending. Shachiku said it was difficult to understand, but the true ending is programmed to create a second dataset after the code is executed. During the ending, all variables are reset to their original values and a new dataset is created. The effect the bug would cause was simply a game of charades. Denia was frightened. All complex terms like programming, initial data, and variable data were just a jumble of incomprehensible words to her. She asked for a simpler explanation. The protagonist explained that only with the true ending would all the bugs disappear, and then Denia would transform back into Princess Ada. The protagonist wondered if Denia were to transform back into the princess, Would he be able to return to his world? Denia replied that when she transformed, she could use the time distortion technique she used to summon him. As long as there was a connection between the worlds, Shichiku should be able to return to his world. They both fell silent and thought about something. Denia admitted that it had been wrong to involve the protagonist in solving other people's problems in the first place. Shichiku said that after being summoned to such a world, it wasn't his place to apologize or take the blame for what happened. Denia apologized wholeheartedly. The protagonist replied that he absolutely adored the world of AV, but in his world, he had a lot of work to do and wanted to continue competing with his friends. He needed to return as soon as possible. Shichiku admitted that he still hadn't figured out whether he was in reality or a dream, but he was glad to be in this world. The protagonist asked for a moment to calm down after a failed speedrun. After the first 10 attempts, the game remained frozen. That's why standing still in the game world made him so uncomfortable. Even now, he felt a sense of urgency, as if a timer was counting down. Denia called the protagonist a pervert. She urged him to go to the Adventurers Guild. The protagonist thought he heard the prince's accent returning. Denia said that since Shichiku found himself in such an unusual situation, he should understand what was happening around him before acting. The Royal Guild collected all information from across the continent. If anything unusual happened, the guild would notify them. The protagonist looked up and noticed a dark vortex in the sky. Denia asked that no one know of the protagonist's achievements. She explained that this vortex was the root of evil, guarded by the Demon King. All demonic creatures originated from it. They are the embodiment of evil and hostile to humans. Even after defeating the Demon King, the source cannot be sealed without Princess Ada. Although the Demon King is dead, the threat of demonic creatures has not disappeared. Until true peace is guaranteed, Denia cannot let down her guard and allow the people to calm down. Shichiku wholeheartedly agreed with her. He noticed an item shop and asked if he could pop in for a moment. Denia gave him permission. The protagonist tried to enter through the door, but he failed and went back through the wall. Denia shouted at him to stop. They walked through the city streets together. The protagonist thought the game's landscape was in ultra-high definition. Now he realized he was actually in a game, but Denia was too smart for a game. Despite Shichiku's overly technical explanations, Denia understood better than he expected. Her conversational flexibility was too great for an NPC. Even with AI, it was beyond the scope of the game. He said he wanted to achieve the true ending, which meant everything in this world should work as in the game. The protagonist wondered if this was truly a world within a game. Suddenly, they stood up because they heard a strange sound. Denia said it was a guard's horn. The guard announced the approach of a wyvern demon. The guard shouted that the demon had broken through the protective barrier and attacked. He urged people to take refuge in sturdy buildings. People fled in all directions. Denia froze and looked at the sky. When she saw the wyvern in the sky, she shouted, "How dare it attack the capital?" Denia prepared herself and threw a magic ball at the demon. An explosion occurred in the sky above the city. Denia was surprised. What had just happened? But when she looked closer, she noticed Shichiku nearby, throwing something at the demon with a slingshot. It was a regular slingshot, but it fired explosive pellets. He said he'd bought the slingshot a long time ago, and it turned out to be useful. It had been an easy victory, because it was a scripted event for his second visit to the capital. The main quest, a city attacked by a flying dragon. Task accomplished. Denia asked again, a scripted event? Shichiku explained that before speedrunning, he'd completed the game the normal way. He'd gotten equipment, collected items, cleared dungeons, and it was interesting. Therefore, he's aware of all the main and side-scripted plots. When a player enters a new area, an event battle is created in which a wyvern appears in specific locations. A split second before the dragon begins to attack, it can be quickly defeated with ranged weapons. Denia asked, with a regular slingshot? Shichiku replied that he used the rapid-fire shot technique. After firing the slingshot, he immediately switched to a stick. When the action is quickly cancelled and repeated, it becomes possible to fire rapidly even with a slingshot. Denia yelled at him to stop clicking. She told him not to use the bug technique so boldly in front of people. The protagonist said he was thinking about how best to defeat the dragon immediately and not wait for it to do damage. Denia said that was right, but they shouldn't attract attention. The way they were arguing was noticed by those around them. One of the guys asked what those movements were just now. The girl said the clicking sound made her sick. Another guy said that a human couldn't move like that. They wondered where this guy came from. They demanded that someone from the guild quickly hire him to guard the city. Someone said that the protagonist was just a cutie. A tailor from a tailor shop appeared in the crowd and shouted that Shichiku had walked through the wall. A woman in the crowd asked how he had walked through the wall. The tailor replied that the protagonist had appeared naked at the tailor shop and paid for the clothes. Shichiku was confused by this conversation. A man shoved a mop in his face and said that the guy was probably a spy from a demonic race. Denia shouted for everyone to calm down because they were wrong. The people didn't understand how they could calm down. They were shouting that this guy could have created a wyvern too, because people don't move with such clicks. Denia realized that people were suspicious, so the bug technique can no longer be used. An elderly woman in a hooded cape appeared in the crowd and told everyone that this guy was a hero from another world. The people in the castle were talking about Princess Ada summoning a hero for the first time in 100 years. That's why he has superhuman strength. She approached the protagonist and asked if he was really Shachiku. He answered and offered to shake the old woman's hand. But a girl from the crowd shouted at the old woman that the man was lying and belonged to a demonic race. The old woman smiled strangely and said she was sure the man wasn't a demon because she could only recognize a demon by seeing him up close. She said that demons had ruled her home village and killed her sister before her eyes. The demons had left a burn on her face when she was young. At that time, she was in shock from the torture, and the power to distinguish humans from demons awakened within her. The old woman said the man didn't exude the cruelty inherent in demons. She took the protagonist's hand and said she had waited so long for a hero. She burst into tears and said she didn't want to be afraid anymore and asked him to rid the world of demons. Denia watched silently. The crowd dispersed, but one guy said goodbye, telling the protagonist not to click anymore. The protagonist thought the part after killing the wyvern should have been different, but the old woman's request was entirely consistent with the script. Denia said that the old woman's village had been under the rule of the heavenly ruler Arachne for 50 years. She herself had heard of a terrible massacre taking place there. While Arachne controlled this territory, the capital could only guess at the true extent of the damage. Shachiku remembered that the old woman's line had definitely been in the game, but here it resonated more strongly than behind a computer screen. He couldn't even find the words to respond. He'd played through this moment 100 times. Denia said that there were many people on this continent who had found themselves in a similar situation. Until the source was sealed, the number of demons would grow. Denia said that Shachiku had immediately defeated the Demon King, and she had failed to fulfill her part of the mission. When the time came, there was nothing she could do. What kind of sacred savior is she after that? Who is she kidding? The protagonist replied that she had just saved him from a crowd. He doesn't know what to say about the game, but she always follows the hero, even in a dark, scary dungeon, which is very scary to visit for the first time. The protagonist said that when he remembered Denia was next to him, he immediately became less afraid. Even when he found himself in such a situation, he could remain calm because he knew she was there. Shachiku admitted that he was a fan of Denia and really liked her. Denia shouted, "What?" The protagonist replied that Denia is by far the most popular character in fan polls. The line Denia says about always being together played a significant role in fan opinion. Princess Ada is in 8th place in the poll. Therefore, Denia's role is no less significant than that of the princess. Denia was surprised. The princess is in 8th place. The protagonist said he tried it today and found the bug technique worked well, meaning the same program operates in this world as in the game. He suggested Denia go to the guild tomorrow. Denia asked if Shachiku had a reason for using bugs. Shachiku replied that they would return Denia to her princess form no matter what. He extended his fist to Denia for reconciliation. Denia replied that they would discover the true ending and save this world. She extended her fist in response. They bumped fists to cement their shared goal. The protagonist said he couldn't break this habit when talking with friends. Night. The Ada Shield Adventurers Guild. A soldier reported the situation. The damage caused by the level 4 wyvern was 0 casualties. Jen asked, "0 damaged buildings?" He grabbed the soldier by the neck and screamed that that couldn't be. Jen called the soldier names and said he must have missed the inspection. The soldier barely audibly said it was true. A girl in warrior armor entered the room. This wasn't just any girl, but the guildmaster. The soldier said that, judging by everything, the self-proclaimed protagonist from another world had dispatched the demon in an instant. The girl asked what all the noise was about. At that moment, Shachiku and Denia entered the guild. Jen was surprised at who dared to show up in the guild. Jen, a member of the capital's adventurer guild, Shield of Aid. Jen asked the protagonist how he dared ignore him yesterday. "Okay, newbie, is he ready? And anyway, why does he have such a sad face?" Shachiku bowed before Jen and said he was very sorry. He said that Jen wasn't to blame for what happened. It was just a motor reflex. Jen asked again, "A motor reflex?" The protagonist said that just looking at Jen brought back memories of all his past mistakes. Jen looked surprised. Past mistakes? The protagonist tried to justify himself and asked Jen to forget everything he'd heard. Jen wondered if looking at him brought back memories. Shachiku regretted. What if someone dear to him had been torn apart by monsters right before his eyes? Or if his face resembled the hero's brothers? What if the protagonist blamed himself for the weakness that led to his inability to save his loved one? A tear rolled down Jen's face, and he said he was sorry too. He didn't know everything he'd been through, but Shachiku could safely call him brother. Shachiku replied, "Thank you," but he didn't understand what Jen was talking about. Denia thought there had been a misunderstanding, but decided it was none of her business. Denia approached Jen and said she wanted to speak with the guildmaster. Jen replied that the guildmaster wasn't currently in the royal palace. He asked if the master was seeking permission regarding the Elite Four. Denia replied that a hero from another world would soon join them. The protagonist wondered who the Elite Four were. Jen asked Shachiku if he was going to apply to join the guild. He replied, "Yes, since that's how it's going." Jen was delighted and said it was just in time. He welcomed him again to the Shield of Aid Guild. At the reception desk, the protagonist was greeted by the guild registrar, Morona. She explained that Shield of Ade was the Adventurers Guild of the capital of Falshire. Guild branches are located in every city, but the Shield of Ida is the guild's main administrative center for the entire country. She showed them what the guild badge looked like. Morona explained that the badge grants access to quests that can be received in any city, including the capital. By completing guild quests, the adventurer increases their rank, gaining access to even more challenging assignments. The starting rank is F, and the highest rank is S. Morona explained that joining the guild usually requires passing an exam, but the protagonist is passing on Danius's recommendation. Jen said the protagonist is very lucky, as the exam is very difficult. The guild's name itself suggests that Queen Ada herself patronizes them. Jen explained that he personally holds a B rank. The guild membership badge allows free entry to any city. The protagonist replied, "Wonderful," but in his mind, he thought he already knew all this from the official game guide. Jen proudly explained that life in the guild was peaceful, and the rewards for missions were comparatively high. And the best part was that Ada herself personally visited the guild once a year to boost the adventurers' morale. Denia listened attentively. Jen continued, saying that some guys joined the guild for Ida. Jen said he'd like to get closer to her, as her beauty was only found in a goddess. After these words, Denia's cheeks flushed. Shachiku teased Denia a little. Denia said that the Shield of Ida was the capital's punitive force, and therefore the best reward for them was payment. Morona stood behind the counter, angry at Jen for talking too much. She said that Princess Ida wouldn't even look at someone like him. Morona reminded her that newcomers were registered here and asked her not to interrupt. Jen told Morona that she was abruptly cutting off his dreams. Morona replied that Jen had asked for it. The protagonist thought the dialogue between the game's characters was even more realistic than in the game itself. He couldn't understand how he had witnessed all this. The NPCs in Anvers are uniquely positioned. This attention to detail helps the game world feel more real. Even the guild's side quests feel like immersion in the world's reality, not like monotonous drudgery. And for hardcore gameplay, there's no better game. Joining the team is unavailable. NPC. Guild registrar from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. From Monday to Thursday, after 19, she goes home, but on Fridays she visits the tavern. Buy her a cocktail at the tavern to receive the C-rank quest, Jen's Lost Item. While working at the guild, she appears serious, but when she gets drunk, her corrupted side comes out. An expert from the AV study group fanbook wrote publicly that he adored her. The protagonist found himself shuddering at the thought of rushing the plot. But honestly, Anvers is just awesome. Morona asked him to place his palm on the crystallization tool. The protagonist agreed. After touching it, an electronic information board appeared in the air. Morona asked the protagonist's name, Shachiku-san? Jen said it was a rare name and asked where the protagonist was from. Morona said the hero's name was refreshing and exotic. The protagonist thanked her for the compliment. Shachiku reflected that the nickname he used for speedrunning streams was now displayed here. There was no concept of corporate slavery in this world. Morona asked the protagonist if he'd ever leveled up. She studied the information carefully and said she'd tell him about it later. Morona asked to wait for registration to complete and called Jen for help. Denia was surprised that the protagonist had managed to defeat the Demon King while still on the first level. Shachiku replied that it was because he was speedrunning. Denia screamed, "Speedrunning again." The protagonist said they had plenty of time, so he tried to explain everything. Denia asked, "Explain what?" The protagonist replied, "How to speedrun Anvers at any percent. It's a wonderful revolution." Denia was surprised. Revolution? Speedrun? Shachiku explained that speedrunning is a high-speed, individual playthrough of the game. It may seem like a solo endeavor, but for the protagonist, it's a team sport. Yes, they compete against each other in rankings, but on the other hand, new discoveries and tips are freely exchanged. This is precisely why AV is so popular worldwide. There are over 500 speedrunners worldwide, and about 30 of them live in Japan. Denia repeated, 500 people. The protagonist explained that the rules of the any percent speedrun on Anversa are that you simply need to defeat the final boss. The faster the better. However, the final boss's attack power is immense. The time required to defeat the Demon King is the main problem with speedrunning in any percent mode. A holy sword with 60 attack plus a base attack of 42 equals 102. Initially, the game took 8 hours to complete, including leveling up to the required level and using the holy sword. The obsidian two-handed sword has an attack of 128 and appears on the second boss of the Elite Four. They decided to shorten the runtime and opt for a weapon with the highest attack stat, namely the Great Sword Obsidian, to make killing the Demon King easier. After this leveling, the entire run took 4 hours. Then, a glitch was discovered in the textures of Arachne Castle, which was being dropped right before the final boss. But even after numerous other glitches were discovered, 2 hours remained the maximum speed limit. Shachiku said that thanks to friendly rivalry and a powerful staff, he managed to defeat the Demon King in 25 minutes right on the first level, and this despite the increased difficulty, as it's easier for the Demon King to lose players without leveling up. Denia sighed and said she didn't understand. Morona turned to the protagonist and thanked him for for waiting. She announced that registration with the guild had been successful. At that moment, the guild master entered the room. She was a tall woman with long hair pulled back in a ponytail. She had a slender, toned body, dressed in knight armor. The master of the Shield of Aid Guild was named Kira Relatifica. The protagonist thought, here she is at last. She is the strongest female warrior in the world of Anvers, Kira's sister. He hadn't seen her in speedruns, so it had been a while since they had seen each other. The character's notoriously problematic design was misleading, but in person, he felt confused, not aroused. Denia tapped the protagonist on the shoulder and said, "Hey." Shachiku replied that she'd misunderstood and that he hadn't thought anything of the sort. Denia said she hadn't said anything, but just in case, she reminded him of their relationship. The protagonist remembered that Kira-san's sister was Ada Jaime's best friend, and one of the few people who knew Denia-chan's real identity. Morona said that the master seemed out of sorts. Jen suggested that visiting the castle had driven her crazy again. The master looked sternly at Denia and asked, "Who is that guy?" The protagonist introduced himself as Shachiku. He is a member of the guild and a hero from another world. Jen asked if Shachiku was that guy. Morona replied that now she understood why he had such a high level. The master paused and declared him a coward from another world. Denia was outraged. The master wanted to test the newcomer and used her appraisal skill. She saw that Shachiku was level 1 and declared him trash. She had heard his story in the castle, but despite Princess Ada herself summoning the hero, he had snapped and betrayed his mission. He simply ran away, without even taking the sacred sword with him. Shachiku replied that he had realized how it looked from the outside. Denia had tried to stop Kira. She said it was necessary. The master asked Denia not to protect the protagonist. Kira took her sword, drew it from its sheath, and declared that the people of this world and the princess would not tolerate being mocked like that. Kira threw the protagonist a sword and offered to fight her if he really was a hero. She said the guild had no use for low-level weaklings and cowards. Morona stood in shock and asked Jen what they should do. Jen replied that they had to stop them. Kira told everyone to calm down because she would also fight with a wooden sword. She said she would break the protagonist's bones, but he would live. Jen shouted that it didn't matter that the protagonist was a coward. Perhaps someone dear to him had died before his eyes. Kira shouted, "Silence." She noticed that for some reason he didn't take the sword. She said that if that was the case, then let him fight with the shameful stick he was holding. Denia was very surprised. The protagonist replied that he had accepted the challenge. He said that he wouldn't consider himself a man if he chickened out in the face of this challenge. Denia tried to stop him. She knew that this stick had 1024 points of damage. It was a strange stick that had defeated the Demon King, a very powerful piece of wood. She didn't know what would happen if he used the stick against a person. Denia said that Kira was a very important friend to her. Shachiku replied that he knew it. He smiled and said he'd deal with her quickly. Denia was terrified. She sat down on the floor and burst into tears. Shachiku and Kira stood facing each other and prepared for battle. The training grounds were in the backyard of the Adventurers Guild. Morona was worried about the protagonist, and Denia was worried about the master. Kira said she thought he'd run away again with his tail between his legs. She was surprised that Shachiku had accepted the fight. Shachiku replied that he didn't have a tail, so he had nothing to tuck in. Kira said that was very impudent of him, but she wanted to praise him for his courage. Kira used the acquired skill, Blessing of the Goddess, from the Valkyrie suite. Morona noticed that the master's armor was turning white. This meant the skill usage had gone too far. Denia thought the acquired skill was a special, unique skill bestowed upon humans by the goddess. Kira's skill is a study in the Valkyrie suite. This skill uses magic to enhance the body's abilities. It allows a user to double their normal strength and speed. It's a simple, yet powerful and useful skill. But even Kira's swordsmanship is superhuman. Denia closed her eyes and thought the protagonist must have already ceased to be human. She screamed that no matter how many lives he had, it was simply impossible. She begged him to stop. Kira said Denia had become attached to him, but her determination was unstoppable. She shouted for the protagonist to prepare. She had just raised her arm to strike, but Shachiku had already changed his position. Kira thought he was fast. Had he closed the distance instantly? If so, she needed to move even faster, and the master struck the first blow. Shachiku was sent flying, blood flowing from his mouth. Everyone thought he was immediately defeated. They all shouted his name in unison and rushed to his aid. The protagonist sat on the ground, a dent in the wall from his back. He thought it was a good thing he was wearing clothes, as the adventurer's set gave him 15 defense points. Jen assumed Shachiku was about to die. He said he'd get a potion immediately. Morona asked Denia to look after the protagonist. Denia sat down next to him and sighed. Shachiku thanked her. Denia cast recovery magic and asked if he was serious. The protagonist replied that this fight had saved a lot of time. Denia was surprised. The protagonist said it was a forced loss event. Critical hit 5,000. This is a fight in which, no matter how hard you try, due to plot details, the game is programmed for the protagonist's guaranteed loss. This is the fight that occurs when Shachiku meets Kira-san in the Adventurers Guild. Admitting to being the hero of the other world in the first dialogue option is the fastest option. From a speedrun perspective, the correct choice would be to instantly approach Kira in the first 4 frames and deliver a strong attack to knock him out. This will take a couple of minutes, but if it drags on, the consequences will be more serious. The protagonist thought Kira was a little kinder in the game. Most likely, there were certain nuances here. Despite the same events, in the game, the hero from the other world was offered training, and after losing, the master said that the protagonist wasn't trained enough and offered to raise his level. After Denia's magic, the protagonist realized he was fully recovered. He thanked Denia. Denia mentioned that she thought he could hit Kira with that strange stick. The protagonist was surprised. He said he would never hurt a friend who was important to Denia-san. That's why he said he knew they were best friends. Denia screamed that she didn't know about it. She unsheathed her claws like a cat and called the hero names. Shachiku defended himself, claiming he'd just been seriously injured. Denia rudely told him to shut up. Morona stood to the side, silently watching. Denia pounced on the protagonist like a cat, and he tried to protect his face. Morona laughed and said he was already healthy. At that moment, Jen came running and said he'd brought all the healing potions. Denia replied that the potions were no longer needed. Chris asked the protagonist if he'd lost to her on purpose. Morona and Jen were surprised. Chris said Shachiku had seen right through her attack. If he hadn't, he couldn't have jumped right into her hand. Anyone capable of such a feat must either be her equal or a better warrior. The protagonist thought this dialogue wasn't in the game. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't tell Kira that his movements were a time saver. Shachiku replied that he had no reason to defeat Kira-san because she wasn't his enemy. They were friends who were ready to defeat the Demon King together. Kira said the protagonist was an unpleasant person, Mr. Shachiku from another world. She apologized for her rudeness. Shachiku said that if they could become friends, then everything would be fine. Kira smiled and replied that she would give it her all to work together from now on. Kira asked Denia if she wanted to talk. She suggested that Denia and Shachiku go to her room. Jen ran towards them, saying that he would go too. Kira sternly told Jen and Morona to return to their duties. Morona agreed. Kira told the protagonist that to defeat the Demon King, this world had decided to rely on a hero from another world. The people in Ada expected great things from him, but she, as someone born in this world, also had her pride. As a nobleman's daughter, she cast aside her happiness and devotedly honed her swordsmanship since she was 5, all for the sake of defeating the Demon King. Therefore, she would be the one to do it. But when Kira learned the Demon King had already been defeated, she was shocked. Denia said she should have told her the truth. Shachiku added that he had fought him and won. Kira refused to believe it. She smiled and said it wasn't a funny joke, because that's why Ada had summoned the hero. Denia replied that it had happened yesterday. The protagonist said he had killed the king within 25 minutes of being summoned to this world. Yesterday he was summoned, the Demon King was slain, he subdued the wyvern in the capital. Today he went to the Adventurers Guild. Chris couldn't believe her ears. She kept repeating, how? Shachiku explained that in another world, he was speedrunning, a competition where you have to defeat the Demon King as quickly as possible. Kira asked again, a competition? To defeat the Demon King? What was he even talking about? Kira turned to Ada and said that this guy was too crazy. Denia asked Kira to abandon common sense. She said that she herself had given up trying to understand anything. Kira sighed and said that Ada wouldn't lie about the Demon King. It would explain a lot, namely the incident that had been going on since last night. Denia asked, incident? Kira replied that, in short, after the hero's summoning ritual, a roar was heard from Arachne's castle in the north. Denia said she had a feeling of impending doom. She recalled the scene where Arachne ordered the protagonist to be found. Shachiku said it was nearby, so the sound should have reached the capital. For a speedrunner, it's only a 10-minute walk. Kira said that according to reports from the Red Lion Group's A-rank team, groups of Arachne spiders have been spotted since yesterday evening. They seem to be searching for someone. Even among the Elite Four, Arachne has the most cruel and superficial personality. She's been cutting things only for fun for the past 50 years, and those she kills are turned into puppets with her threads and poison. The most disgusting thing is that she forces those under her control to awaken their acquired skill. The protagonist repeated, acquired skill. Kira said she awakened the skill she wanted through sword training, but other people sometimes awaken skills when they find themselves in dangerous situations. Kira said their goddess is fickle, and they cannot predict what kind of power will be bestowed upon a person. There are different types of power, from legendary to ordinary. The protagonist thought that now, hearing such information, it all reminded him of Gacha. Arachne especially enjoys torturing beautiful women, including to awaken their abilities. She then creates special puppets from people with superior abilities. Shachiku said that if he understood correctly, the old woman who could distinguish between humans and demons was one of the victims from 50 years ago. Denia said that Arachne wasn't satisfied with that woman's ability, so she didn't become a puppet. The protagonist clenched his fists. He thought it was a sickening truth. If he stepped even one step outside the capital of Anvers, the world would be cruel and ruled by demons. The people of this world were so cornered that they had to rely on someone from another world. The Elite Four represented a formidable force, capable of crushing humans. They obeyed only the Demon King, who was the strongest of all. But if the king was defeated, what would they do next? Kira said they had to act quickly. Moreover, Arachne's stronghold is located in the capital's suburbs, and her temperament and impulsiveness are high compared to the other four. Spies have been sent out since yesterday, but Arachne could attack faster than they could report it. Kira guessed the attack could begin even tomorrow. She was afraid they wouldn't be able to delay the attack even for a second. Shachiku asked. Can't delay the attack even for a second? Kira became sad and said that perhaps they wouldn't be able to assemble a royal army today or tomorrow. For that, they would need to convince the elder sages. Shachiku suggested defeating Arachne's army right now. He said they must win immediately before they reach the capital. Kira asked Denia why Shachiku was shaking so much. Denia replied that he was shaking because he wanted to speedrun. The protagonist said he was fine. He held the world record for the true ending. He never restarted the battle with Arachne, and his split time was consistently under 15 minutes. Denia asked the hero to speak so she could understand. Shachiku explained it differently. He said that if they speed it up now, they wouldn't even need a day. It would only take 15 minutes to defeat Arachne. Kira shouted, 15 minutes? Shachiku replied that due to this situation, they would need to prepare, as safety was more important than time, but they would need Kira-san's help. The guildmaster hesitated, but listened carefully to the protagonist's plan. She said it was a plan she didn't understand. Denia asked Kira to simply trust the hero. Kira said that a little earlier she had agreed to be the protagonist's friend, so the knight wouldn't take back her words. Shachiku was delighted and said they needed to prepare something that could be made right away. He went to the tailor and the equipment shop. Denia was surprised. Right now, Arachne's castle. Arachne caught the spy and told him it was dangerous to hang around her. She said that lately, people had forgotten their place. The spy hung with his hands bound, his body covered in bruises, and crawling with spiders. Arachne looked at the spy and asked him if he had finished yet. She expected nothing less from a defective trinket. Arachne shouted loudly that she wanted him, a hero from another world. She would definitely make him her puppet. The protagonist ran through the streets of the capital, followed by Denia and Kira. They begged him to stop and explain the plan. You can't strive to become a major killer. These were the words of Kira's grandfather. He had fought many life-or-death battles. He said that the weak defeat strong giants. Such a celebrated heroic tale is simply rare. You need to have sufficient strength, technique, and equipment. Quantity and quality are justice on the battlefield. The winner and loser were determined even before the battle began. Kira thought they'd finally found it. Shachiku said the shining scale ore had finally smelted. The goddess of random numbers smiled upon them too. Denia asked, does that mean they don't have to break these stones anymore? Kira couldn't understand why the protagonist was looking for treasure. The outskirts of the capital. The abandoned scuba mine. The protagonist announced that they could now safely begin the final run. Denia was surprised. The run? She was upset and said it was some kind of nightmare. Had she lost all her strength because she broke so many stones? Shachiku asked if she needed a potion. He said that before, it was primarily a guaranteed drop. He explained that previously, in order to get a rare item in the game, you simply had to manipulate the RNG. But in the updated version, a new patch was released and the drop became random. Denia said she didn't understand anything, as usual. Kira said that shining scale ore was simply a beautiful mineral. These beautiful crystals, which peeled off like scales, could fetch a fortune when used as decoration, but they were too fragile to be used as weapon material. Even if they could be sold, they wouldn't be useful in combat. The protagonist stopped the girls with a wave of his hand. There was a rustling sound in the bushes, and a two-headed monster jumped out. It rushed at the hero, but he managed to defend himself and strike first. The monster fell, defeated. Shachiku said he didn't like the high risk of encountering monsters at night. Kira couldn't believe her eyes. After all, Shachiku had killed Orthrus with a single swing of a wooden stick. She said it was excellent. Denia once again thought that a stick was incredibly powerful. Shachiku suggested they hurry back to the guild. Kira asked him to wait and take Orthrus's magic stone. She said that by refining the magic stones in the guild, he could level up. That's what adventurers do in this world. Denia added that even when he killed the giant spider and the wyvern, he didn't pick up the magic stones. Kira said she acknowledged his combat prowess, but confronting a level 1 Arachne was reckless. Kira was level 40. The protagonist considered these words. He said that perhaps this was the right thing to do, since speedrunning wasn't an option right now. He turned and walked toward the stone. The protagonist said that they would both see everything with their own eyes. A stone lay on the ground, and Shachiku reached out to pick it up. The stone suddenly rose and glowed. It hovered at one level, glowing and changing shape. Kira said there was nothing unusual about what was happening. She said there was no point in refusing. Shachiku held the stone in his hand and said the cutscene was too long. The girls asked, what? The protagonist explained that the cutscene for picking up the magic stone only appears once, but it takes a full 32 seconds. Even if they skip it, taking into account the memory load, 10 seconds are lost. Kira asked, a cutscene? Denia asked about leveling up being an obstacle to a speedrun. Shachiku said they can't ignore 10 seconds in a speedrun that lasts less than 30 minutes. Denia asked, so picking up a stone dropped by a wyvern is also bad. The protagonist replied that it had become a habit when he beats the game not to pick up any objects. Denia clutched her head and said she was completely confused. Kira said that sounded funny. Denia looked at her in surprise. Kira replied that her friend's voice sounded vivid, just like when they were kids. Denia replied that it was just Kira's imagination. She suggested continuing preparations to overthrow Arachne. Kira paused. The capital. The Adventurers Guild. Shield of Aid. Morona congratulated the hero on successfully acquiring the magic stones. Jen said it was amazing for a first attempt. Jen wondered if these stones weren't from weak monsters, and how could Shichiku defeat them? Morona suggested using a purifier. The magic stone purifier was created by the Magic Academy. Morona said the protagonist would now be able to level up from level 1. She explained that they needed to place the stones inside and fill it with crystallization solvent. While the stones carry immense power, they contain miasma. If too much is absorbed, even a human can become a monster. Shichiku said that a wyvern once absorbed too much magic in monsters. This resulted in it becoming a monster itself. The higher up the food chain, the easier it is to become a monster. But if the miasma is extracted with a purifier, the safety level for humans increases. The hero's achievement table changed from 1st to 4th. Shichiku thought the cutscene was interesting to watch, but it was too long. Kira suggested that while they were in the guild, they test his acquired skill, the goddess's blessing. Kira sternly said that she wasn't sure she could take him with her at his current level. If there was anything to rely on, it was the acquired skill. Jen wondered where everyone was going. Kira said that according to legend, when a hero is summoned from another world, they are granted a skill with which to defeat the Demon King. Usually this is checked immediately after the summoning, but last time, Shichiku ran away. The protagonist replied that it was simply a misunderstanding. Kira said she could check the skill right away. Of course, if Shichiku was okay with it. Kira wanted to use a high-class appraisal skill. Morona was happy because they would be the first to learn the hero's skill. Shichiku asked to check the skill quickly. Morona guessed it would be an instant kill skill or a skill that nullifies attacks. Kira sternly told the two to be patient. The protagonist thought it was bad because everyone had high expectations of him. He knew the summoned hero had absolutely no skills. In the original AV game, this was a developmental step immediately after the summoning. The people in the castle were incredibly disappointed. After 100 years, the promised hero had no blessing. People asked if this meant the Holy Savior had summoned an ordinary person. Some argued that this didn't align with the legend. The criticism of ISEKAI'D began. After defeating the Elite Four, heroic skills awaken, because you can't defeat the Demon King without skills. Being weak at the beginning of the game is the fate of RPG heroes. The protagonist knew that he hadn't fought the Elite Four, meaning he had no skills. In terms of status, right now he was an ordinary weakling with a level 4. The Shichiku table showed level 4, no skills, and a wooden stick as his weapon. The protagonist thought about how cruelly he would disappoint all the people he had befriended. Kira carefully studied the table. She didn't understand what was happening. Was this the language of another world? Shichiku exhaled. He asked, "Do you have a skill?" That was simply impossible. Kira replied that she hadn't seen such letters in this world. She said she would rewrite the unknown letters, but it was difficult. She admitted that she couldn't understand them correctly. The protagonist looked at the sheet and thought it was written disgustingly. It looked like letters from his world, but he himself couldn't read them. The root of the problem was that he defeated the Demon King using bugs, but this bug wasn't reported to the game developers. Where did the coding error come from? Who could have done it? The protagonist wondered what he was blessed with. Kira said there was no choice, so she alone would subjugate Arachne. Jen shouted, "Subjugate Arachne?" Kira answered, "Yes." She just hadn't told her subordinates about it. Jen asked about permission from the elders. Kira replied that she hadn't received it and would act at her own discretion. Jen said this would cause a lot of problems. Morona shouted to the master that, first of all, it was simply dangerous. The enemy was Arachne, one of the Elite Four. Kira sighed and said that danger was approaching the capital. If she were alone, she could lead the guest away from the city. The master said that the hero from another world is only on the 4th level. All they have left after today's excavation is shining scale ore. The hero's granted skill is unknown. They have no more aces up their sleeve. Kira said she'd been following the hero all day only because of Denius. She admitted she didn't understand what he was doing. Kira said she couldn't trust the hero. Shichiku apologized for not explaining more. He admitted he had a strategy. If they combined their forces, Arachne could be defeated. Jen said the protagonist didn't know, but Arachne was a strong opponent. The protagonist explained that they wouldn't be able to use a wooden stick this time, so they needed a strategy. If they lacked a level, they could make up the difference with money. Morona was surprised. Money? Jen replied that there was a quest for mercenaries. Even S-rank mercenaries participate in this quest. There was a chance of earning big money by selling shining scale ore. Denia said that at market price, one shining scale was worth only 10 sen, and for that price you could only hire a B-rank team. A B-rank team would hardly be able to tame even a wyvern. Denia meowed. The protagonist thought it was the first meow he'd heard in a while. Kira sternly said that if this was the hero's plan, he could have told them about it earlier. Kira suggested using her money or the guild's money, but the old sages would find out. Shichiku said that if it was just about money, there was something he could do. He pressed his finger to his mouth and said he would show them a power from another world, but asked everyone to keep it a secret. Jen asked, "A power from another world?" Morona said it would be fun. Only Denia shouted that she had a feeling something incredibly bad was about to happen. Shichiku warmed up a bit and said that a lot of time had passed, so he wasn't sure he could do everything right. To do this, he'll need ore and a regular slingshot. The protagonist said that first he needs to remove one shining scale, then quickly equip and put away the slingshot. He did this several times. Everyone watched the process silently, anxiously. After a while, The protagonist exhaled and said he'd done everything correctly. Jen asked what Shichiku meant. Shichiku replied that he'd been able to equip the ghost slingshot. Jen asked which ghost slingshot he was talking about. Mirona said the protagonist wasn't holding anything. The protagonist said that in this state, if you take out shining scale ore from your inventory, you'll get a huge pile of ore. Everyone's mouths dropped in surprise. Shichiku said they now had 999 pieces of ore. He suggested trading it at the trading guild and making a ton of money. Mirona almost fainted. Denia called the protagonist a name and asked what he was doing. Shichiku replied that everything was fine. It was a harmless duplication bug that didn't affect the system at all. Denia shouted that this wasn't what he was talking about. Shichiku himself couldn't believe he'd managed to make all the stones the same shape and that they were real. Denia asked, "Wouldn't this ruin the country's economy?" The protagonist replied that if the things that had increased weren't money, but jewelry, then they could pass it off as the discovery of a new mine. Denia couldn't believe that would be the end of it. Kira looked at the ore and thought it was simply impossible. This man from another world was doing strange things. Shichiku said he actually had a strategy. Kira looked at him incredulously. Denia pounced on the hero again like a cat, screaming that her country was taking damage. Blood streamed down the hero's face, and he screamed that in this situation, he was taking damage. He promised to be perfectly prepared for tomorrow and achieve a worthy victory over Arachne. Shichiku brought 999 units of shining ore and asked to sell them. The Royal Capital Merchants Guild headquarters. Everyone in the guild was shocked. The girl at the reception desk thought something was wrong. 999 pieces. Could they all be genuine? It simply couldn't be. She looked in the magic mirror, because it never makes mistakes. The protagonist hurried the girl. The girl asked the guy to bring 9,990,000. The guy was surprised. The girl said it was correct. He needed to get gold coins from the vault. The guy asked where the safe was located in the room. The protagonist thought the bank was deliberately stalling. Finally, they brought out the bags, exactly 9,990,000 in gold. Shichiku quickly loaded everything into his bag, thanked her and said goodbye. Kira and Denia shouted for him to stop and wait for them. The girl at the bank said something was wrong. Shichiku was walking down the street, musing about how the Merchant Guild opens trading at 9 in the morning. He'd sold the multiplied shining scale ore and received almost 10 million. He had a traveling merchant's pouch on his back and traveling merchant's boots on his feet. The day before, the protagonist had gone to the tailor and asked about the traveling merchant's outfit. Could he carry the entire sum at once? Kira accompanied him. He muttered as he walked. Shichiku said it was all thanks to the shining scale ore cheat. Kira asked Denia why this guy could only explain everything while running. Denia answered she doesn't know herself. Suddenly, a bird flew up to Kira with a letter in its beak. Kira wondered if it was a message from Myron. What was it? She read the letter. The protagonist walked confidently, thinking about speedrunning. So everything was going according to plan? Kira shouted that she had good news. She said that a super talented S-rank group had appeared in the northern square of the royal capital. People had gathered in the square. Everyone had come to see the S-rank group Silver Dragon's Fang. The crowd was buzzing. Someone said this was the same group. Someone was surprised that they were real. Someone wanted their autograph. The girl in the hat from the group smiled and said that yes, it was them. She said that she was a great mage of Silver Fang, the first student of the Magic Academy, and her name was Eriha. She said that her autograph alone was worth 100 coins. Petting Rutra costs 1,000 coins. Her handshake costs 10,000 coins. Someone in the crowd said that S-rank adventurers need a lot of gold. Among the group was the last of the Silver Wolf line, named Lutal. One of the guys asked the heroes for an autograph and said they were friendlier than he expected. Another guy in the crowd was surprised by such words. He asked, was the guy given the autograph? The mercenaries' behavior was more like a dance troupe than warriors. Many onlookers stood around the heroes, but among them stood a black shadow. A bearded man in warrior armor told Eric that they were not traveling performers. This man was the leader of the Silver Dragon group, named Mashamu. He asked the crowd if they knew where to find a hero from another world. Mashamu said that Ida should have successfully summoned a hero the day before yesterday. They wanted to join the party too. He said that now was the time for everyone to unite to defeat the Dark Lord. A girl in the crowd asked if the heroes were really talking about that clumsy guy. A guy in a crowd asked, "So this is a hero? Isn't that weird?" Another guy suggested asking normal adventurers for protection. Someone in the crowd said that if they were looking for a hero, they should go to the guild and offered to escort the heroes. At that moment, something cut Mashamu in half, as if with a knife. The people were terrified. They didn't understand what was happening. The two halves of the hero fell to the ground and blood flowed. Someone shouted, "A monster?" The pseudo-heroes ran, screaming that they'd been exposed. But they didn't get far, because the real Silver Fang group caught up with the deceivers and punished them. The real Eriha shouted that real heroes would never talk such nonsense. She directed her magic at the false mage, and it burned away. Mashamu said it was a complete disaster that imposters had used their name. Now their reputation would be ruined. The real S-ranked group Silver Dragon's Fang appeared before the villagers. Eriha asked the frightened boy if he needed help. She said everything was fine and extended her hand. Eriha said she wasn't the type to take money for a handshake. Ariha turned and told the old woman with the disfigured face that she had kept her composure remarkably well. The old woman thanked Ariha. Mashamu said the old woman's observation frightened him. He asked how she knew the heroes weren't real. She recalled the moment the monsters had captured her. The monster held a blade to her throat and said that if she had raised a cry in the unarmed crowd, the creatures would have torn off the veil and destroyed the slaughterhouse. In such cases, a quiet cry for help was needed. Mashamu said the silent call had been the right decision. The old woman adjusted her cloak and apologized. She said she still got very scared when she saw monsters. Mashamu thought that this poor old woman, even without being an adventurer, knew how to defeat monsters. He asked Eric to calm the old woman down. Mashamu said that together with the hero, they would defeat the Dark Lord. He doubted the capabilities of yesterday's conscript and said it would be better for him to stay out of the battlefield. Meanwhile, the main avenue of the Hero King, the capital. Kira, Denia, and the protagonist were running down the street. Kira asked Denia about the protagonist planning to run to Arachne Castle. She said that was madness. Denia replied that she couldn't guarantee anything. Shachiku said that if he somersaulted forward, he could get there faster. The girls shouted in unison for him to stop. Shachiku explained that this somersaulting technique, when performed correctly, doubles speed, making it popular among speedrunners. But during such a run, the player must frantically press buttons, and their fingers simply fall off. The player is forced to take 2 weeks off work due to a tendinitis epidemic. The protagonist said this technique was banned for player health reasons. Using it now results in a rating reset. Kira asked, tendinitis? She asked if Shachiku had overtrained. Denia asked, isn't that just fun in the game's hero's world? Shachiku replied that the game itself made him serious. Kira thought the more she learned about this guy, the more mysterious he became. Do people like that really exist? A few years ago, in the royal castle, little Kira screamed for them to let her go. She screamed for them to let ISEKAI'D go, and called everyone around her insolent. She was 8 years old then, the eldest daughter of Duke Latifika. One of the adults reprimanded Kiroa for calling Princess Ada by her first name. Kira screamed that she didn't care because they were friends. Ada was also 8 years old, the first princess. Fear filled the princess's face. She was worried about her friend. Milena Lee Salafari, the high priestess, held Princess Ada back with a gesture. She told Kira not to disgrace herself. The priestess said that Lady Ada had been blessed from birth as the holy savior. She was the hope of this world. The princess must train hard for the day of the hero's summoning. Therefore, there was no time for childish pranks. A tear rolled down the princess's cheek. Kira screamed that she understood everything, and she wouldn't be angry over ordinary training. She assumed the priestess was mocking Ada. She screamed that she had seen everything with her own eyes. She said the priestess was only pretending to offer healing potions, but was actually beating the princess. The priestess replied that this was training to strengthen Ida's spiritual power. To summon a hero from another world, she would need to recite sacred verses for 10 days and nights, and the princess lost consciousness on the second day. The great summoning is possible only once a century, when the stars of the worlds align, and failure cannot be allowed. Only heroes from another world can become the hope of this world, devastated by demons. The priestess said that Kira, as the Duke's daughter, must understand everything. Can't we allow the next century to be an era of darkness? Kira asked. What other hope? The priestess said that to summon a hero, ISEKAI'D must sacrifice herself now, and then the stranger will kill the Lord of Darkness. Kira screamed that this is their world. She asked the priestess if she had gone mad. She asked why the soldiers had swords. She suggested that the soldiers kill the demon. She didn't understand why everyone was hoping for a child. Kira insulted the elders. The priestess' assistant called Kira a little fool. The priestess raised her hand to stop her. She said that if Kira was so confident in her words, then she should try everything herself. The priestess said that Kira, unlike Princess Ada, was simply a spoiled brat. She had no blessings. All she could do was yelp. Some of the adults shouted, "What is Kira doing?" Kira pulled the sword from a soldier and tried to lift it. Kira proudly declared that she was from the line of Latifis, and she would destroy the demons herself. Kira raised the sword and shouted that she would stop tormenting her friend. Ada looked at her friend in surprise. From then on, Kira studied with her grandfather. She diligently practiced swordsmanship. She completely abandoned music, which she loved. By the age of 15, there was no one in the castle equal to her. At 17, she finally awakened the goddess's blessing. At 18, she defeated the captain of the Dragon Knights. Afterward, she was given Latifis' armor, a symbol of the kingdom's power. But she failed to stop Aide's training. As a result, Aide became the strongest saint in history. Rumor has it that the demon has already been defeated by the protagonist from another world. But the battle is not over yet. Kira reflected on how she, like Aide, had now gained power and realized how naive she had been. That was precisely why she was willing to share this burden with the princess now. Kira ran after the hero. She told him he had passed the northern square. Kira asked him about his intention to seek help from an S-ranked squad. Shachiku replied, no. Kira asked, what? The protagonist apologized and said he couldn't say that yesterday because of Jen. Denia said she hadn't heard Jen offer help at all. The S-ranked Silver Dragon's Fang command won't be required. Kira was quite surprised. She tried to talk to Shachiku Shachiku on the run. 50 years ago, in the village of Tadanka, not far from the capital, a village girl named Laurent. It was a time when life was quiet. Laurent's younger sister called out to her and said she would come with her. The younger sister's name was Nolan. Lauren asked her sister if her fever had gone away. Nolan replied with a smile on her face that she was already feeling much better. A man in a cart asked the girls how far they had gone. Laurent replied that it wasn't far, just to pick raspberries on the hill. The man replied, "Okay," and asked them to be careful. The man mentioned that monsters had appeared in the area. The Lord asked them not to stray far from the village. The man said he was talking especially about them because they were the most beautiful sisters in the village. Nolan laughed and said that her uncle always said that. The man said that everyone in the village thought so. A young man passing by asked if they were going to pick raspberries. He asked her to share some jam with him later. The man in the hat asked Nolan not to overexert herself, and Grandma asked her to come back before dark. Nolan replied that she knew and added that they had left. Nolan asked her sister if she was interested in heroes from another world. Laurent asked why such questions. Nolan replied that she had read about the adventures of old heroes, about the Tree of Directions, caves of magic crystals, forests of dragon bones. She said they were beautiful. She dreamed of going on a journey with a hero. Laurent replied that with such poor health as her sister's, it was impossible to go on journeys. Nolan said, "The goddess's blessing." Laurent asked again, "The goddess's blessing?" Nolan replied that she had read about it in a book, how the goddess grants people a special blessing. You just need to train hard to receive the gift. Then the adventures and fun begin. Laurent asked, "What kind of nonsense is this? When the hero comes, they will already be old ladies." Laurent stood up. Nolan asked, "What's the matter?" Laurent asked, "What's that strange smell?" Laurent said it wasn't time to burn the grass. They approached the cliff and saw the village ablaze, with huge spiders crawling across it. Nolan said they needed to warn the Lord immediately, but she didn't see the monster standing behind her. It was a huge spider with a spike on its head. The spider said she had finally found the girls. She said such sweet faces could be offered to Arachne. Then the girls lost consciousness. The spider tossed Laurent's body aside and said they needed to brand the defective body because her skill was dirty. Laurent was covered in bruises, blood, and unconscious. Nolan was hanging, bound in a web, and calling for her sister to help. Small spiders crawled toward her and began to climb her body. The spider said it was the other sister's turn now, and she hoped her body would be blessed. Nolan screamed in pain and begged them to stop, but no one could help her. Laurent's body lay on a pile of other girls' bodies. Her eye was badly burned, and tears were streaming from her other eye, but she didn't have the strength to help her little sister. Her eye would forever be imprinted with the image of the monster that killed her sister. Present time, the old woman with the burned eye woke up in her bed and screamed, "Nolan!" She sat up in bed, trying to catch her breath from the nightmare. She tried to convince herself that there were no monsters nearby and everything would be fine. The old woman began to sob again. The former village of Tadanka, the street of spiders. Kira and Dinia froze, but Shachiku confidently walked forward. He said that this time he had a wooden stick, so instead of the forest of dead souls, he would go straight to Arachne. It would be faster that way. Kira said that 50 years ago, this village had been a hell, created by Arachne. She thought that by royal decree, this territory was now under Arachne's control and off limits to everyone. Under the influence of dark energy, life seemed to have stopped here. People's personal belongings lay scattered around, as if they'd just dropped them. Denia called out to Kira and asked her to hurry, otherwise they would find themselves in such horror again. Shachiku looked back and said it was good the girls were already here. He asked them to stay close. The protagonist said this was the most difficult location in the game for destroying Arachne. Kira said Arachne's castle was still far away. Suddenly, spiders appeared from behind the wall of the ruined house. The heroes looked at the monsters in horror. Kira realized they were Arachne's servants. She needed a squad of warriors right now. Shachiku stopped her and said that the goddess's blessing should be saved for the battle with Arachne. He faced the spiders alone. Kira was shocked. She said that even he couldn't handle that many spiders. Shachiku replied that with a wooden stick, victory would be easy. The protagonist said the fight would take too long, so they should just dash through. Shachiku said they needed to group up and quickly move through the spiders. He yelled for the girls to follow him. Kira stood there, completely confused. Denia yelled for her to hurry, or they fall behind Shachiku. The spiders have fixed movement patterns. If they catch you, you could lose more than 10 seconds. When a spider aggroes, you need to immediately change direction 60 degrees. On the first level, you need to conserve stamina, so just run through. But this section still requires quick and precise movement. Denia yelled that the spiders were catching up from behind. Shachiku said it was the right time to throw gold coins. It's a gold throw mechanic. Gold coins deal damage to enemies and allow you to escape pursuit. The amount of gold you'll earn decreases accordingly. Shachiku said that if you throw the coins like that, the spiders will immediately fall behind. This method can only be afforded when there is a lot of money. Shachiku himself was surprised that coins distracted the monsters, since gold is useless to them. He said they successfully completed the Street of Spiders. He called the girls excellent runners. Denia asked, was this what they were saving up gold for? Such a large amount. Kira was indignant. Who would even appreciate praise for running? She thought about the hero having the power to destroy enemies, So why were they running around and throwing gold around? She was surprised that the protagonist wouldn't even glance at the carnage in this village. She didn't believe that for the hero, this was just a game of defeating the Dark Lord. She remembered his words about how he won the competition to destroy the Dark Lord in a matter of minutes. One day ago, the throne room of the Dark Lord. A girl with a scythe walked through the hall. A hand flew before her, ringing a bell. The girl said, "Assembly." She asked all sinful children to appear before her. The spider weaving white threads. The bloody Duke of the Scarlet Feast, the black hungry swamp, the apocalypse of the King of Despair. The girl called to appear before the remains of her father who rules the end. She asked for the heads of these strangers called heroes. This girl was the fourth Lord of Darkness, the daughter of the Lord, whose name is Morphomet. One day ago, during ore mining, the round table of the Lord of Darkness was assembled. The daughter of the Lord, Morphomet, looked at the open door through which the Spider Queen, Arachne, entered. It was not just a door, but the gates of hell. A magical teleporter that connects the base of the four lords and the round table. A skinny guy at the table said that Arachne was late. He asked about Arachne having forgotten how to use teleport magic. A boy joked that insects have leaky memories. That impudent youth was a black, hungry swamp named Raspi, one of the four kings. A man in a cape, long hair, and glasses said that was an impudent greeting. That man was the King of Despair, Brahmas, one of the four kings. Brahmas said the young had become bloodthirsty, a real disaster. Raspi smiled and said that he sounded like an old man. He asked about Brahmas, even considering a spider a young woman. Arachne asked what Raspi had said. Raspi laughed loudly and told the old woman not to overexert herself. He said her doll would soon meet its end. Brahmas looked down and sighed. Arachne screamed and rudely told him to shut up. She called him a worthless, lesser demon. Raspi was very surprised. Morphomet asked them to quiet down. She said she had gathered everyone for a reason. She asked about how everyone had probably already noticed that the great Dark Father, the Lord of Darkness, Apocalypse, had lost the Black Sun. The demons were surprised. How had he lost it? Morphomet burst into tears and said that Father had disappeared. She screamed that Daddy was dead. Brahmas said that the Lord of Darkness had never lost to anyone. He said that everything was just terrible. Morphomet said that when she was bored, Daddy let her listen to the last cries of dying people. She looked at the demons and asked, weren't they sad too? She clarified, why wasn't anyone crying? She called the demons names. Morphomet commanded everyone to cry. Raspi began to whine. Arachne sat with a thoughtful expression. Morphomet said that yesterday, people summoned a hero from another world and he killed Daddy. The hero that was summoned killed the Lord of Darkness that same day. Raspi laughed loudly. He said that this is impossible. It's all nonsense. He said Morphomet was sick. At that moment, an iron glove flew up to him and covered his mouth. Raspi was surprised. Morphomet asked if he was making fun of her. She called the youth a name. Morphomet said it was truly impossible for the Lord of Darkness to be killed so quickly. She couldn't believe her own eyes. Morphomet said she didn't want to, but she would show him her father's last moments. She asked to see his final gaze and the image of the one who would become everyone's worst enemy. In front of her hung a large mirror called the Dead Man's Eye. It displays the events the deceased saw before their death. Everyone peered into the eye. A close-up of the protagonist appeared on the screen, wearing only swimming trunks and holding a wooden stick. Arachne recognized him. Brahmas asked if this was the protagonist from another world. Raspi asked about Shachiku being a samurai, and why was he naked? Raspi saw Danaya's image and said, what a cute kitty. Then, everyone saw the protagonist deliver 3 blows with a stick to the Dark Lord. Everyone watched intently as the protagonist dodged the Dark Lord's blows. Brahmas was surprised that Shachiku was able to almost kill the Dark Lord in 3 blows. Maybe he cast some kind of effect? Raspi shouted that it was a lie. Everyone noticed that the protagonist wasn't even holding a sacred sword. He was hitting the Dark Lord with a wooden stick. Brahmas was surprised that a wooden stick was so powerful. He didn't understand what kind of joke this was. Were modern wooden sticks really that strong? They saw the final blow, which killed the Dark Lord. The villains were shocked by what they saw. Morphomet said, that's the end. That's how her father was destroyed by Shachiku from another world in a matter of minutes. And he did it in a stupid way. Morphomet screamed that she would not forgive, never forgive. She would mockingly, slowly, and cruelly torture this hero who had so humiliated and killed her father. Her eyes were bloodshot with hatred for the hero. Morphomet noticed that Arachne knew something. She said that if there was any information, it should be told immediately. Arachne thought that Morphomet had decided to boss everyone around just because she was the Overlord's daughter. She smiled and thought that this would not last long. Arachne looked kindly at Morphomet and replied that she knew nothing. Arachne's castle. She walked quickly through the corridors of her castle. She kept repeating, I want it, and I will get it anyway. She obsessively wanted the power of a hero from another world. Arachne thought she could put an end to the arrogant, spoiled Morphomet, and at the same time, she'd be able to finish off the insolent slime and squash Brahmas too. They all infuriated her. Thus, the protagonist would become her puppet. She needed his strength, which had crushed the Overlord himself with a stick, and the unrivaled might of a battle god. Yes, Shachiku was a man, and that infuriated her greatly, but his strength was mythical. She would make him her toy and take all the power. She had a blessing in reserve that would make this plan a reality. The golden armor of the sun, that was the blessing she had been given. Even the blade of a diamond sword or the greatest spells of an archmage would leave no scratch on her. She would have absolutely impenetrable defense. Arachne was sure the hero's club was powerful, but it was only a physical attack. The protagonist could defeat the overlord and others, but against her, he would be powerless. She would be able to mock him in peace. Arachne was certain that golden armor was the most powerful shield. She hadn't become the sword to kill the overlord, but armor was the only thing that could neutralize the hero's power. When she received the hero's power, she would become the rightful and de facto ruler of the world. No matter who or how they tried to object in this world, the strongest prevails. Until now, she had been a weakling, dancing to the Dark Lord's tune, but now everything would be different. No one would dare give her orders. She would destroy all disobedience. Her ideal world of absolute submission. She would become the most powerful new overlord. This was freedom. This was true happiness. Arachne's eyes were wild with grandiose plans. She couldn't wait to implement them. She hurried to find out what her subordinates were doing. She loudly ordered that a hero from another world be brought to her. Arachne was greatly surprised when she saw the hero in her castle. The timer shows 12 minutes 35 seconds. He stood in her hall and greeted her politely. Kira thought she was facing one of the 4 evil kings. Arachne herself. Kira recalled images of the destroyed village and wanted to finish Arachne off right then and there. Before the battle, they ran through the castle corridors, and Shichiku said Arachne would attack with endless hordes of spiders while they were making their way to her. During the main attack, he needed to be protected, meaning Kira was clearing the area of spiders. Kira wondered if Shichiku was trying to penetrate a weak spot. She answered, okay. But she asked if the protagonist was sure they had a chance. Denia replied that they had already defeated a demon many times stronger than Arachne. She drew conclusions from the HP of the star-faced Iceweaver, the appearance of a 2-headed dog in the beginner's area, and the spider patterns. Shichiku said that after he flawlessly killed the Dark Lord, the difficulty changed from easy to very hard. Denia asked again, very hard? Shichiku explained that this meant Arachne was now stronger than the king he had defeated. Denia said the protagonist was scaring them. The protagonist smiled and said that everything was fine. He had taken everything into account when planning the game's strategy. He asked them to trust him. The protagonist said that killing Arachne with just a whisper wouldn't work because she had too much health. Therefore, they would have to make several attempts. And for a sure victory, they would need to completely clear out the smaller enemies. Shichiku said that this is why he called Cyrus with him. The heroes stood waiting for Arachne to act, and she laughed joyfully when she saw the heroes. The timer read 12 minutes and 48 seconds. Arachne said that they came to her themselves. She so wanted to meet the hero from another world. This time, Shichiku wouldn't run away from her. She was glad he brought new toys with him. It was sweet of him. Arachne showed her scary smile and said that she would make all the heroes her dolls. Arachne pointed her hand towards Kyr. Black holes appeared over Kyr's heart and eye. Kira was frightened and fell to her knees. She was confused. Kira gathered her strength and thought that she was alive. She examined her body and found no wounds on it. She realized that a sense of fear had been cast on her. She felt that her body was not obeying. Denia called her friend's name. Shichiku realized that Kira had received 5% of Arachne's aura of terror. He thought that today was not their day. Arachne said that this female knight was only formidable in appearance. The protagonist tossed Denia a mana restoration potion. He said that they were changing strategy. Until Kira recovers, Denia would have to clear out the small fry. Denia asked, what? Shichiku replied that with this mana potion, her strength should be enough. Denia agreed. Arachne said she didn't know what they were planning, but it was all useless. Denia attacked the small fry. She used Nekomata Fire. This is Denia's initial mass fire attack. She boldly threw fireballs in all directions. Kira remained kneeling, trying to come to her senses. She saw Ada in the form of Denia, fighting the enemy directly. A voice in Kira's head shouted that they had the sacred sword and ordered them to go and deal with the enemy. But Kira couldn't get up. She was afraid. Did she think she could help Ada? Because she was the one they called the strongest swordsman? The voice in her head screamed. If she didn't get up now, everything she had achieved over the years would be in vain. Shichiku told Kira that although she was still under the influence of fear, she should not take her eyes off Arachne. He said they were already in the final stages of clearing Arachne. Kira asked, final stage? Arachne proudly said she was sorry, but the protagonist from another world was late because she was wearing the golden armor of the sun. The protagonist said that the golden armor of the sun was Arachne's mythical skill. The armor was completely invulnerable. Denia asked again, complete? Arachne laughed and said her armor blocked all damage. Fists or magic were irrelevant, which meant she was invincible. Arachne said the heroes were doomed to die and couldn't scratch her. Arachne ordered them to fall before her. But at that moment, a pile of gold coins flew towards her, and something went wrong. Her huge spider began to crumble into pieces. Denia wondered how Shichiku could attack Arachne, but how did he do it? The protagonist was holding a bag of gold coins and throwing them. Arachne groaned. Who is he? And more coins flew at her. Shichiku said that the most dangerous thing in the battle with Arachne is the absolute protection of the golden armor of the sun. Physical, magical, and mental attacks have no effect on it. Even the legendary staff is useless here. Denia asked if throwing gold coins isn't a way to escape from an enemy. It doesn't even look like an attack. Shachiku answered, yes, it's not an attack. In the game's system, throwing gold coins isn't considered an attack. Therefore, the golden armor is powerless against it. In this game, throwing coins is considered a special action. You throw money, deal damage, and guarantee escape, but in a boss fight, escape is impossible, so this technique should be used differently. Arachne didn't understand why her armor didn't work. The protagonist said that since they can't run away, they can throw coins endlessly. This way, they can turn coin throwing into a pseudo-attack, but if they fight honestly, they'll die. In a normal strategy, they need to get a mythical item that removes Arachne's blessing, and that takes a lot of time. Therefore, coin throwing is the best option. The protagonist said that the damage from coins depends on the amount of gold spent. If they throw the maximum number of coins at Arachne, about 30 times, that's the end. The timer was 13 minutes and 56 seconds. The protagonist knew that under the constant barrage of coins, Arachne wouldn't even be able to move. Arachne ordered the spiders to silence Shachiku. Denia assumed a fighting stance and shouted for them to get out of the way. Arachne started cursing her subordinates. She became very angry and shouted that she was the queen of the spiders and would kill them all. Shachiku threw gold coins in her direction again and again. They were flying straight at the target, and then the formidable Arachne sat down on the steps. Shachiku shouted that it worked. When HP drops to 50% and a precise finishing blow, you can cancel the second phase of the attack. Otherwise, Arachne will start spitting webs and other nasty things, so they skip the 60-second transformation scene. Arachne thought she didn't have enough strength to transform and cursed. Shachiku swung again, throwing a handful of coins. Kira couldn't understand what was going on. She saw a man throwing handfuls of coins. She saw a monster writhing from gold. Could this really be the hero's battle with Arachne? Arachne screamed for the protagonist to stop. She was calling the hero names. Kira thought Arachne looked like a clown, even though she was one. Arachne wasn't scary to Shachiku. He always missed everything and ignored common sense, tragedy, and fear. The only thing on his mind was to kill the enemy as quickly as possible. Kira looked at him and thought, here he is, a hero from another world, a real RTA guy. Kira watched this fight and thought it was some kind of circus. Absolute madness. Denia was also courageously fending off the attacks of the small spiders. Suddenly, she noticed that her magic was exhausted, and all her potions were gone. She hoped that Shachiku only had a couple more throws left. She hoped that Aid's body retained all its strength. The protagonist noticed something was wrong and shouted, Denia. Fear was on Denia's face. She didn't want to let her comrades down. Denia was about to draw her blade, but Kira came to her senses, pushed her friend aside, and used Battle Symphony and Waltz. She slaughtered spiders left and right. She loudly shouted to Shachiku that she was taking the spiders on herself. The protagonist replied, okay. He only had 4 more throws left. The timer showed 15 minutes and 2 seconds. Arachne screamed that she understood everything. She begged him to forgive her. She promised to bow to the hero. She wanted to give up all her dolls, land, castles, servants. She promised to do whatever he wanted and said. Arachne screamed for Shachiku not to kill her. She didn't want to die like this. Shachiku asked why she was begging for mercy. He remembered the old woman's story about the events of 50 years ago, how the old woman cried when she lost her sister. Shachiku swung and threw another handful of coins at Arachne. He said that the time she had taken from many people was more valuable than her life. With the last hit, Arachne exploded. It was the final blow. The boss was defeated. The timer showed 15 minutes and 38 seconds. During the attack, Arachne screamed that she had done nothing wrong and was not guilty of anything. And so the monster is defeated and her crown lies on the floor. The hero's assistants can't believe it's over. Shachiku said, the speedrunning Arachne kill is complete. The final runtime is 38 seconds. Slower than expected, but the unexpected 3-minute delay at the trade guild was later compensated for, so the result is quite respectable. Kira asked why the protagonist brought it up again. Shachiku replied that after every RTA run, it's necessary to analyze mistakes and use this experience in future runs. Kira asked, what next time? The heroes noticed that Arachne's castle was beginning to crumble. Denia shouted for her friends to come to her immediately. She held a tambourine and used the Shepherd's Light Journey. It allows instant teleportation to previously visited locations. It's a special artifact granted to Denia by the kingdom. Denia shouted, the kingdom of Falshura. The castle shattered into pieces, and the surviving spiders scattered in all directions. The royal city of Falshura, the Adventurers Guild, Shield of Aid. The heroes landed right in the guild. Jen noticed his comrades and ran towards them, shouting everyone's names. Shachiku was surprised when he saw Jen. Jen exhaled and said he made it. He held out a braided cord and told them to take it for good luck. It was the Thread of Emancipation, a one-time rare item that allows one to escape from any dungeon or boss fight. Shachiku asked, what? Jen asked again. Why was the protagonist staring at him like that? He said Shachiku was going to hunt Arachne? The protagonist was a little confused. Denia said it was only 9 in the morning. They were only gone 15 minutes. Jen said that with this cord, Shachiku could at least return alive. He didn't want the newbies from his guild to die. Shachiku said that they had already returned from the mission and didn't need the thread. Jen listened attentively and shouted loudly, have they already killed Arachne? A round table of demons. 3 people were sitting at the table. Brahmas said that Arachne was with them just yesterday. Raspy suggested watching the recording again. He said the spider died from gold coins. It was laughable. Morphomet said the golden armor wasn't Arachne's own. She died without even recognizing its weak point. She smiled and said that was a true fate for such a stupid insect. Raspy laughed and said that Arachne was the weakest of the four. Bramus said that they were true demons because they were cruel. He was thinking about how these two were purebred demons, and their taunts weren't just mockery. They were the privilege of the strong. He thought about how the protagonist had killed the Dark Lord on the first day of the summoning, and on the third day, he had killed Arachne. It was hard to believe, but it really happened. How could the protagonist have known the weaknesses of Arachne, an ally he didn't know? Perhaps the goddess had blessed the hero with the gift of prophecy, or the eye of truth? But that wouldn't explain everything. The hero's movements were too honed, as if he'd fought Arachne many times before, as if he'd repeated the training over and over again. That simply couldn't be true. Killing the Overlord with such tricks was simply impossible. People had fought him for thousands of years, and yet he killed Shachiku with a simple stick. The Overlord of Darkness had no weaknesses. Weaknesses? Bramus wondered how a coin toss was different from a stone toss. A human gold coin couldn't possess such power, even with magical enhancement. If it were possible, then why hadn't Arachne known about it? She hadn't been so foolish as to not test the armor for all its strengths and weaknesses. Bramus realized he had too little information to draw conclusions. He decided not to base assumptions on incomplete data. A gold coin was Arachne's weakness? But that simply couldn't be true. In any case, this protagonist was an unprecedented threat. The millennia-old balance of demon supremacy was beginning to crumble. The protagonist needed to be either disposed of or subjugated. Bramus wanted to give up on stupid revenge, but that was unlikely to work. Raspy laughed loudly and said that the protagonist could kill with more than just a stick. He called the protagonist a funny guy from another world. The protagonist woke up in bed that morning. He said he'd slept well. He looked at the clock to see what time it was. Kira said the protagonist's place was noisy. Denia added that they were coming in. The protagonist cursed Denia and Kira. Denia asked why he was naked. Confused, Shachiku asked if the girls had seen his phone. He said he'd searched all his clothes, but his phone was nowhere to be found. Without his phone, his work would be ruined. Denia said it looked like Shachiku hadn't woken up yet. She asked what a phone was. Kira closed her eyes and asked the protagonist to get dressed quickly. The protagonist got dressed and apologized for his indecent appearance. Denia asked if he was awake yet. Shachiku replied that he remembered being summoned to the world of AV. He'd defeated a boss on the very first day, and today was the 4th day since his summoning. Shachiku said he'd long been wondering why Kira was wearing that outfit. She was wearing the costume from the Battle Maiden's Vacation DLC. It was simply gorgeous. Kira was a little shy but replied that Shachiku had been working non-stop for 3 days and was probably tired. Therefore, today Shachiku should forget about battles and rest his body and soul. Kira added that if a woman in armor came to her, she wouldn't be able to relax properly, so she decided she needed to change. The protagonist replied that he now understood. Kira asked what he didn't like. She proudly replied that it was just a different style. The protagonist replied that compared to the bikini and armor, this costume looked very strange, but everything was fine. Shachiku said that this costume suited Kira very well. Kira blushed again. Denia suggested going outside for a walk because the weather was nice. The protagonist said that if that's the case, he had a place he'd like to go. They set off together. Kira thought that, if you look closely, the protagonist had a rather handsome face. She stopped her thoughts and told herself to pull herself together. Kira thought that Ida was risking herself for her friends. Kira remembered that when Shachiku was naked, Ida had taken it calmly. Had they really slept together? Kira's expression was one of undisguised horror. Denia looked at Kira and said she was acting strange today. Shachiku replied that it was definitely not a bug in the game he knew about. Kirari Latifis at 24 complicates everything. A little boy on the street pointed at the protagonist and called him a glitched hero. The woman asked her son to stop, but the boy said that his mother had said so herself, that heroes from other worlds are called glitched. People on the street started repeating the words, that Shachiku was glitched. The tailor loudly asked, "What, the gentleman from another world?" People surrounded the protagonist, and he was confused. Someone said the protagonist had already killed Arachne. A man in the crowd said that Jen had already told him everything. Someone in the crowd called the protagonist a suspicious person. Kira was angry at Jen for his talkativeness. Denia said that Arachne's castle was within walking distance of the capital. There was nothing to hide. Shachiku thought how warm the reception was. He felt like he was back in the fan room at the game. One boy in the crowd asked if the protagonist had already killed Wyvern. He did it with a glitch, right? A girl stood nearby, holding a slingshot. Shachiku thought there was no such event in the original game. Shachiku started fooling around with the children. The royal capital, a new residential area for refugees. The protagonist knocked on one of the houses and apologized for disturbing them. The old woman opened the door. She recognized the hero and offered him a chair. The protagonist replied that everything was fine. They had come uninvited. He handed the old woman a butterfly brooch. Shachiku said it was left over from defeating Arachne. He asked if the old woman would recognize the brooch. The old woman remembered that her younger sister had a similar brooch. Denia wondered if this old woman was a relative of the girl who had been under Arachne's control. The old woman said that she still has nightmares about that day. She saw her sister murdered before her eyes. She could not forget how her sister remained captive to the spider. But now it was all over. A tear fell from the old woman's eye onto the brooch, and she said there would be no more bad dreams. For a moment, Shachiku saw in the old woman a young and beautiful girl. She thanked the hero from another world. The protagonist waved goodbye to the old woman. Kira said that the hero actually had a heart. She was sure he only thought about games, but he turned out to be different. The protagonist replied that it was the side quest, Butterfly in the Web. Denaya asked again, a side quest? The protagonist replied that the quest was related to the main storyline, but not required for the main ending. The side quest, Butterfly in the Web, was completed. The reward for the quest was 1 healing potion. Although the quest was skippable, Shachiku said he just wanted to return her dead sister's brooch. The girls stood in shock. The protagonist asked why they were so quiet. Kira said it was surprising for her to hear such sentimental words from a guy. Adventure Guild Shield of Aid, Morona, the receptionist, screamed, Shachiku-san. She asked, what was that? Shachiku asked, what? Morona asked, why didn't the protagonist hire S-rank mercenaries? She specifically called them to fight Arachne. When the mercenaries arrived at the guild, the hero was nowhere to be found. The mercenaries were very upset that they hadn't been accepted. It was a nightmare. The protagonist thought that training mercenaries took a long time. Morona burst into tears and said she was very glad that everyone had returned safe and sound. Morona apologized to Kira and said that she knew the master had a day off, but an urgent request had come from the castle. She said they needed a report on Arachne. Kira opened the letter and said that for the Council of Sages, this was a very quick response. She said she would now write a report to her superiors. Kira said their vacation had been short but pleasant. Kira clarified that she would not mention the hero's abilities in the report to reduce questions. Kira wished him a pleasant vacation. Denia and Shachiku went for a stroll through the city streets. Denia clarified that there were very few people in the city at this hour. The protagonist confirmed it. He thought about how they were alone for the first time since they met Kira. Shachiku called out to Denia-san and said he should have said it sooner, but he'd been choosing his words carefully. He bowed his head to Denia and apologized for putting her in danger. He said his decision on the battlefield was critical. Because of it, she could have gotten hurt. Denia smiled and said she was fine. She was healing the damage with a potion. Kira had arrived on time, as planned, so she was unharmed. Denia asked the hero not to apologize. She said she was still curious about how the protagonist keeps repeating, "This world is a game," yet he behaved as if it were real. Shachiku replied that he wasn't kidding. Denia laughed and said she was just teasing him. Denia said she knew the risks when she went to Arachne. She simply decided to trust Kira and the hero. Denia smiled sweetly and asked the hero not to let her down any further. Shachiku was surprised. Denia laughed and said that Shachiku's name sounded funny when said out loud. The protagonist pondered the fact that Denia had called him by his first name for the first time. The name Shashiku really didn't sound serious. He wondered if he should introduce himself by another name. Denia asked what the protagonist was thinking about. At that moment, the kingdom's soldiers surrounded them. They were completely confused by what was happening. Denia asked the soldiers what they were doing. One of the soldiers said that the hero from another world was being called to the castle, and he couldn't refuse. Shachiku thought this was nonsense, because such a plot had never been in the game. Someone off to the side asked the soldiers to stop. A female voice told the soldiers not to be so threatening because he was a guest, invited to her from another world. Shachiku couldn't believe his eyes. Princess Ida stood next to the carriage. He couldn't understand how 2 princesses could be there at the same time. Ida Falshura is the only daughter of King Falshura of the Kingdom of Terwari. She is considered the most powerful saint among all saints, capable of attaining the rank of divinity despite being human. Falshura's royal castle, the princess's tower. Ida asked the soldier to leave them alone. She said Denia would be with her, so no guards were needed. The soldier replied, yes. The protagonist couldn't understand how Ida and Denia could be there at the same time. They were climbing up to the princess's tower. Shachiku thought it unlikely, but it was possible it was the result of streamers pushing trash. If you attack NPCs, the heroes move slightly to dodge, which could lead Ada outside the castle. He wanted to introduce Ada and Denia. He found it strange that Denia remained silent the entire journey. Maybe it was a systemic bug unknown to him? Suddenly, Denia said enough of the theatrics. She called Ada Ain. Ain asked if the protagonist already knew about them. Ida began to undress and suddenly pulled out her breasts. The protagonist blushed. A young man was sitting on the couch. He said that it seemed like his little sister really liked someone. The protagonist's face was horrified. He didn't understand what was happening. Denia said that Shachiku had probably already figured it out, but she would introduce them anyway. She said that this young man, Ian, was her younger brother, her doppelganger. The protagonist asked who that was. It was the first time he'd heard that Princess Ida had a younger brother. Shachiku said, but she is the only daughter. Breast-enhancing gel pads were scattered on the floor. Denia asked if the protagonist didn't know that. She asked if, after something like that, the protagonist would claim to know everything about this world. Ain thought he didn't know any NPCs. Shachiku thought about how he knew all the game's characters, their stats, subquests, and behavior patterns. But there was nothing about Ida's double or a character named Ain. Ain said the protagonist couldn't have known about it since he was from another world. He shouldn't even exist. The late King Leondel VIII, Princess Ida's grandfather, was a great womanizer. He grew tired of his mistresses, both noble and common, and turned to street ladies. That's how Ain was born. Technically, he's not a brother, but an uncle. Shachiku thought about how Ain had immediately revealed everything about himself to the stranger. Ain said his mother died of an illness, and the royal family didn't want to acknowledge him. They simply ignored him. But eventually, he became the spitting image of Princess Ida. Because of this, he was secretly hired as the princess's double. When Ida travels incognito as Dania, Ain is in the castle. Ain said he'd rather play a female role than live in the slums. The protagonist thought the doppelganger with Aid's face had a long tongue. Ain said only his sister, the current king, and Lady Kira knew of his existence. Therefore, it is not surprising that he, as a hero from another world, is not aware of it. Shachiku tried to explain the situation to Ain, but Denia said it wasn't quite as Aid had imagined. She said the protagonist wasn't quite like him. Ain asked what his sister meant. He said there was no time for introductions now. Ain clarified that the protagonist had destroyed Arachne on the third day after being summoned. He asked for all the details of the battle. Ain said that for a hero from another world, it is simply unimportant. But for them, killing a demon was a major event. It was a major political issue. Such a quick victory left the ministers and the Council of Sages perplexed. Denia said Ain is very intelligent and performs all the prince's duties in her absence. Ain explained that the Council of Sages is an advisory body to the king. It consists of representatives of the 6 great houses, including the royal family. Lady Kira's house is also one of them, although Lady Kira herself does not represent her family. The protagonist thought the Council of Sages in the original game was only mentioned in name. However, one theory holds that the council forbids anyone other than the hero from another world from killing greater demons out of fear of their king. This is a fan theory based on the events of the game. Denia said that some members of the council will not be pleased with the news of Arachne's victory. Shachiku reflected that no one else knows yet that the Dark Lord has been killed. Ain explained that due to the abnormally quick victory, the council demanded an explanation from Kira as the guild leader. They are interested in the reason behind this unprecedented speed, but Kira hates the council, so she'll clearly withhold key details. The protagonist recalled Kira's words about her concealing Shachiku's abilities. Ain said that was precisely why he brought the protagonist here. As the princess's double, he needed to know the truth in every detail. Denia asked Shachiku to tell them everything, even about the first day after being summoned. The protagonist agreed. Denia warned Ain that he was about to hear shocking things. Ain replied that he was expecting something unusual, so he wouldn't be easily surprised. He warned them not to underestimate the shadow of the wisest princess, Ida. Sweat poured down Ain's face when he learned that the protagonist had already killed the Dark Lord. He didn't understand what kind of nonsense this was. Shachiku explained that in another world, there was a speedrunning RTA to kill the Dark Lord. Ain asked why Shachiku killed the Dark Lord first. The protagonist replied that now, to achieve the true ending, they must kill all 4 Dark Lords. Denia thought about Kira's completely different reaction to the news. Denia reminded Ain that the protagonist was slightly insane. Ain shouted, "Slightly." He considered it and said that even he would have kept such news hidden. He clarified that only Ada, the protagonist, and Kira knew about the Dark Lord's death. Denia answered, yes. She said that the root of evil was still sealed, so revealing such a secret would only sow panic among the people. Ain thought about it. He said that if his sister said so, it must be true. He said he would somehow calm the council and prevent them from interfering. Ain said he still didn't trust the hero. He called the hero too suspicious. Ain said he had urgent matters to attend to and asked if Shachiku wanted to play RTA again to restore the village of Tadanka, ruled by Arachne. Denia repeated, RTA for restoration? Tadanka was devastated by Arachne, but now it's neutral ground. Ain said it used to be a thriving village, with a capital nearby and a large dungeon filled with adventurers. It's a lucrative prospect for villains and demons. In a couple of days, news of the victory over Arachne will spread across the continent, and then a new monster base may appear nearby. This can't be allowed to happen. Therefore, it's necessary to quickly build the minimum necessary structures and relocate the people from the capital. There are too many refugees in the capital. This would kill 2 birds with 1 stone, but everything must be done as quickly as possible. The protagonist paused, thinking, quickly. Ain asked if the protagonist was so confident in his speed. Didn't he want to risk it? Ain gave them only 2 weeks. He asked if the protagonist could handle it. Denia was surprised. 2 weeks? Ain said he didn't want to keep the protagonist for long. If this was a game, then he should be able to handle it. Denia grew angry and said that it usually took years to rebuild a village. She asked what this had to do with killing the Demon King. Ain knew that rebuilding the village in 2 weeks was simply impossible. That's what he was counting on. He didn't expect the hero to do a full-scale job. In fact, they had already begun repairs themselves. The main goal was to keep the hero in Tadanka for 2 weeks. Ain realized Shachiku was strong and needed him to sit back and fight off bandits and monsters until the restoration team arrived. But the protagonist would be in a prominent position. Ain wanted to figure out the true strength of a hero in 2 weeks. Ain asked what the protagonist would say to such a proposal. He replied that it wasn't an order from the princess, but his personal challenge. Ain said they had to hold out for 2 weeks. If the hero failed, then so be it, he would console him. Shachiku specified what would be considered village restoration: building fences, 10 houses, a town hall, and fully preparing the fields. The smirk disappeared from Ain's face, and he replied that that's roughly the amount of work required. Dania asked if it was possible to rebuild a village in RTA. She thought it would take months. Shachiku said that rebuilding is a chain of side quests. They're not required for the true ending, but if you use 100% of RTA, they're necessary. Shachiku said that RTA isn't just about killing demons, although killing Arachne was easier. Shachiku asked Ain, "How about 30 minutes for all the work?" Ain asked, "Does the protagonist take him for a fool?" The protagonist was surprised. Ain said that 30 minutes is enough time to warm up dinner. Rebuilding requires decades of hard work to restore the former life. The protagonist was surprised and said that Ain himself just gave 2 weeks for the work. Ain shouted that it was simply impossible. He insulted the protagonist. Ain got very angry. The protagonist thought that in his anger, Ain was the spitting image of his boss at work, a tyrant. Dania tried to calm everyone down and shouted, "Quiet." She said that royalty and her guys shouldn't yell like a drunken brawler. She asked Ain to apologize to the hero. Ain was surprised, but apologized. Shachiku thought that this was the same guy who couldn't talk back to his older sister. Dania apologized for Ain's rudeness. She explained that Ain doubts and provokes the hero only because he is worried about her. She said the protagonist isn't the kind of person you trust at first sight. He should realize that himself. He walks through walls, multiplies objects, makes powerful dashes, and kills monsters with a stick. The protagonist agreed with her words. Dania turned to her brother and said that it was okay not to trust the hero. But if Shachiku said he would do it, then so be it. She told her brother not to worry. She said Shachiku was a weirdo, but not a villain. Although the word weirdo is putting it mildly. He said he'd arrive at Tadanka village tomorrow morning. If all went according to plan, he'd be finished by lunch. Ain said he still didn't believe the hero. The protagonist suggested Ain watch the work himself. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Ain replied that he had a council meeting tomorrow regarding Arachne. He said he had plenty to do there too, but promised to drop by if he had time. Ain asked the hero to try not to screw up. Shachiku and Dania descended from the princess's tower alone. The entire way, the protagonist thought about the princess's doppelganger, a character not mentioned on the game map. But if the game guide were taken as reality, such a character could very well exist. But the protagonist wasn't sure it had to be a man. These weren't just games. There was a sense of humanity in him. Since the protagonist arrived here, Dania and Kira have felt like real people. The game had already created realistic characters, but the protagonist felt like they were exploring an unseen side of the game. Fans of the guide will be delighted. Perhaps Ain didn't exist in the game, but simply didn't show up. The RTA schedule is based on optimizing all game elements. If an unknown factor appears, the previous route can fall apart. From an RTA perspective, surprise is the greatest enemy. Dania asked what happened. Shachiku looked at her and continued to ponder. Maybe it was too late to worry. The possibility of free communication with Dania was unusual in itself. On the other hand, isn't RTA about adapting to the unexpected? The protagonist folded his arms and prayed that they would complete everything tomorrow. Dania asked, "Is that a prayer?" Meanwhile, the outskirts of the capital city, the old village of Tadanka. Trolls were wandering through the village. Ariha cast her first fire spell. A pillar of fire rose into the sky which she could control. Not a trace of the trolls remained. The S-rank mercenary group Silver Dragon's Fang. The group consists of the one-eyed dragon Mashamu, the great mage Ariha, and the silver wolf warrior Lugol. They lit a fire in the village of Tadanka. Ariha reported that the number of monsters had decreased and that they had done a good job of defending the village. Mashamu replied that he very much hoped the group would live up to Princess Ada's expectations. Suddenly, a bird brought a message for the group. It was from the princess. Masamu said the message stated that the protagonist from another world would be arriving in the village tomorrow. The rest of the group weren't very happy about this. Ariha asked if Shachiku had really defeated Arachne. He'd only been in this world for 3 days after being summoned. Even the power of Cyrus of the Latifis clan was beyond comprehension. What kind of tactics could work like that? Masamu replied that perhaps that was the hero's strength. The quest stated that they would need to help the hero rebuild the village and report back. Of course, this seemed more like reconnaissance than assistance. But the princess was deeply interested in the hero from another world. Mashamu said that tomorrow they would have to apologize to the hero for underestimating him. The group members agreed. Ariha asked Lugol what was wrong. He replied that he smelled a strong demon. Mashamu and Ariha tensed. Lugol used the wolf territory skill and scanned the entire nearby area. Behind a brick mountain, they discovered a large black slime. Mashamu was surprised that it was a slime. The monster struck Lugol. Mashamu screamed his name. Black slime began to take the form of a human body and said that the taste was familiar. Slime asked, "Is this a silver wolf? Aren't they endangered?" He said he used to eat them a lot. The black slime transformed into Raspi. He asked, "Is that how it happened?" But at that moment, Mashamu struck with his sword and severed Raspi's arm. Raspi was confused. Mashamu asked who he was. He thought that slimes usually slowed down after being consumed, but even he, a great warrior, was beginning to lose his composure. A new arm grew in its place, and Raspy said he wasn't afraid at all. He asked not to be angry because he ate a dog. Mashamu rudely told him to shut up. Ariha leaned over Lugol's body and called him. Mashamu said he wanted to hear that everything was fine, and that they would buy her a new lipstick later. He asked her for a huge supply of magic. Ariha tried to heal her comrade. She said that all the cosmetic bags on the continent wouldn't cover the damage. She thought that only someone of the 4 Heavenly Kings level could kill the legendary beastman Lugol in an instant. Ariha pulled out a knife and spilled her blood, then cut off her hand. She said she didn't care about anyone. She'd unleashed a 1,000-year-old supply of primordial magic. She said that for the first time in 200 years, she was truly enraged. Ariha said she'd leave one hand for the monster for now. She asked Raspy if he'd finished making faces. Ariha and Mashamu walked confidently toward Raspy, and behind them was a blaze of flame. He said it was time for a super tough training session with the brats. The result of this training would be the end of the boy's life. Raspy was in no hurry and stretched leisurely by the fire. He stroked his belly and said he was full. Mashamu's broken sword lay on the ground nearby. Raspy said he thought they'd show him something cool, but it was just a possessed dragon, nothing special. Ariha's hat was also lying on the ground. Raspy said that releasing accumulated magic was boring and unoriginal. He looked at the wolf's half-body and said that the silver wolf was total crap. They weren't even worthy of his attention. Raspy stretched again and said that everyone here was monotonous and predictable. He thought it was complete crap and utter boredom. In the present, only foreigners ruled. Raspy noticed a piece of paper with a royal seal on the ground and became intrigued. He read about a hero from another world and realized that they would finally meet. He licked his lips and said he would extract every secret and unknown mystery from the hero. He longed to savor the hero to the last bone. Shachiku was in danger. The next morning, the heroes rode on horseback to the village of Tadanka. Kira asked about Shachiku meeting with Ain. She said that Ain wanted to see the brave man in person before reading her report. She called Ain a smart guy. The protagonist looked at Kira and wondered why she was wearing bikini armor again. He asked Kira about their disagreement. Kira replied that they weren't fighting, nor were they friends. She said Ain was a very contradictory person, perhaps because of his past, but he wouldn't open his heart so easily. Ain's attempt to test the hero was entirely typical of him. Kira was certain that Ain would only open his soul to Ida. Denaya said she thought Kira liked Ain. Kira asked if the princess really thought so. She always felt like Ain was looking down on her. The protagonist thought about the game characters he knew heatedly, discussing a character he didn't know. It was a very strange feeling, like a feeling of alienation. When the heroes arrived at the village, they were met by the entire S-ranked Silver Dragon's fan group. They joyfully greeted Miss Kira and Master Brave. A tent was set up in the village for convenience. Fake Mashamu introduced themselves as Team Silver Dragon's Fang. He said their rank belonged to the Dragon Bone Symbol Guild. This was the southern part of the kingdom, the Primeval Forest Guild, made of dragon bones. He said he was the group's leader. One-eyed Mashamu. The girl in the hat was the elven great mage Ariha, and the warrior Ruthor from the Silver Wolf tribe was named Lugol. Fake Mashamu said the princess had ordered them to assist the hero in rebuilding the village. He suggested starting with clearing out the monsters. He said he was ready to undertake any task. Fake Mashamu hoped that they would get along with the hero. Kira wondered if Ain had probably ordered them to keep an eye on the hero. Kira introduced herself as the daughter of Duke Latifus, Kira Re Latifus. She is also the master of the Shield of Ada Guild. She said she was also a member of the Adventurers Guild and showed him the local guild symbol. Kira suggested they drop all formalities. Fake Mashamu agreed, adding that he was poor at observing court etiquette. Shachiku mentally recalled the S-rank heroes of the Silver Dragon's Fang group. He remembered the names of the group members and even that he had summoned them before during battle. In the original, he only knew the heroes' names and techniques, so this would be his first conversation with them. After meeting Ain, he finally felt more at ease in the company of familiar characters. Raspy, as Mashamu, was overjoyed to finally meet a hero. He saw the hero's wooden stick. His joy knew no bounds. The slime Rapsy had a special ability. He could praise the taste of brains. By tasting a subject's brain, he could steal all their memories. So he completely ate the brains of a group of these humans. He was confident no one would suspect him of anything. Raspy looked at the hero and thought about how mysterious he was, possessing a high degree of bravery. He dreamed of obtaining the hero's wooden staff. But more than that, he wanted the hero himself. This was a treat he'd encountered for the first time in 1,000 years. He calmed himself down to contain his ardor. Kira said the Silver Dragon's Fang was reliable. Kira offered to introduce herself in return. She said the hero from another world was named Shachiku. He had been summoned by Princess Ida a few days ago. Denaya introduced herself and said she was a mage from the Dania cat tribe. She was a feline with character and Princess Ida's favorite. The wolf growled in response. False Ariha said Lugol was jealous of his excellent human language skills. False Ariha called called Denia a sweet kitty. The protagonist thought about how these three were unaware of Denia's true nature. She was certainly beautiful as a princess, but no one could compare to Denia. He felt at peace with her, as if he were at home. False Ariha asked the hero about defeating Arachne. She asked what blessing he had used. Shachiku replied that it was more likely not a blessing, but the RTA mode he constantly uses. False Ariha fell silent and looked surprised. Kira called out to the hero. False Ariha said that this was all very interesting. She asked, "So this is the blessing bestowed upon the hero?" She smiled sweetly and said that she was traveling to achieve perfection in magic and touch the truth of all things. False Ariha said that if she succeeded in using RTA, she might get closer to her wish. False Ariha took the protagonist's hands and in a gentle voice asked him to tell her everything about RTA. She looked straight into his eyes. Raspi, as Ariha, was thinking about how easily human males fall for such female behavior. Shachiku asked the fake Ariha if she wanted him to tell her all about RTA. His hands clenched nervously at the words, and a jolt of electricity coursed through his body. His cheeks flushed and his face became covered in sweat. He replied that of course he would, about the leaderboards, tricks, and bug techniques. He invited the fake Ariha to run RTA together in the AV world. Kira was frightened when she looked at the hero. He seemed possessed. She pulled the hero away from the fake Ariha and asked what he was even thinking. She said he'd never seen this woman before and was ready to reveal all his secrets to her. Shachiku replied that Kira was misjudging people. Even if a woman is beautiful, she might be addicted to the game. He loudly declared that finally someone had appeared who wanted to experience life in RTA mode. True hardcore pros should appreciate newcomers. Kira asked again, "Hardcore?" The protagonist explained that he'd previously explained to Denis about the RTA chat in the game AV. It wasn't just him creating it. There are a huge number of speedrunners who complete RTA, approximately 500 of them. Different players share bug fixes and daily competition results with each other. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call them crystals of knowledge, but months and years have passed since AV's release. Lately, the discovery of techniques and bugs has begun to decline. That's why the RTA leaderboard is currently being frozen. Kira asked again, "Frozen?" The protagonist said that freezing occurs during a period when nothing new is being released. RTA is turning into a game where you try to avoid mistakes and replicate existing schedules. This makes it difficult to beat your time and adversely affects your mental health. But there's some fun in that. Kira asked, "Isn't RTA just a game in the hero's world?" She thought it would be better for him to rest. The protagonist said that a fresh opinion is a light in the darkness, the existence of a newbie who wants to join the game. Experienced pros eventually start to think in the same way. Therefore, the more newbies in the game, the higher the likelihood of new skips. For example, the first one to skip the fight with Arachne in any percent was a newbie who had only been playing RTA for 2 weeks. Anavar Anmai percent is 4th in Japan, nicknamed Left Minister of General Attack. She accidentally discovered that she had passed through the wall and can now reach the final boss directly. Everyone in the chat was very happy for her. Shachiku said that newbies in RTA are the golden key to a faster chart. The protagonist wanted to provide comprehensive support so that newbies would become comrades in RTA. And to achieve this, even though he was a formidable boss, he told the newbies all the tricks he knew. Anavar any percent is second in the real world, nicknamed Kanitama. He asked the hero for a trick to get past the scene with Jen. Kira was noticeably tired and asked, "Is that so?" She admitted she was wrong. False Ariha stood to the side, waiting for the right moment to approach. Raspi thought that once he understood the chart, he could easily master RTA. If he ate the hero's brain, he would achieve an easy victory. But before that, Raspi wanted to see RTA himself, while Shachiku was still alive. At that moment, Denia jumped up from behind and delivered a cat-like blow to the hero. She dealt him a tiny amount of damage. She sternly told the protagonist to deal with these invitations in his own world. Shachiku replied that he understood everything. He thought about how when the topic of RTA came up, he began to forget himself. He promised that this would not happen again. Shachiku told Kira that this time the RTA category would be almost non-existent because it was tied to the correct ending. But even if someone found out about it, it would not have a negative effect. Shachiku said that good deeds shouldn't be delayed. He suggested they begin restoration with RTA as soon as possible. Raspi was delighted. Denia stopped the protagonist and said that they needed to do one thing before starting. She laid flowers at the village nameplate. Everyone prayed for the innocent souls to find eternal solace in the arms of the merciful goddess. May happiness be with them. May happiness be with everyone. Fake Mashamu said that Denia truly speaks good human language. Denia proudly said that Lady Ida taught her this skill through the Requiem. That's why her speech is so natural. Shachiku suggested they get started quickly. He mentioned that he had an item in his arsenal purchased in the capital. Kira wondered what the protagonist pulled out of his bag. The protagonist pulled out a frying pan and said it was time to start the RTA countdown. Without this item, there would be no restoration of Tadainka village. Everyone was surprised when they saw the frying pan, the vast labyrinth of Falsula. In the depths of the labyrinth, a stream of magic erupts, where demons gather, and everything is surrounded by a poisonous fog. Due to the power of this fog, defeated monsters rise again after just a day. Falsula Labyrinth, Level 1. The heroes run through the passage. The timer shows 1 minute and 15 seconds. The protagonist said said that the most important thing in rebuilding the village with RTA was collecting materials. He said that now they would kill every monster and collect the items they dropped. Fake Mashamu replied that everything was clear to him, but Raspy thought it was boring. A huge toad was walking towards them, holding a sword in its claws. It was a frogman. Raspy thought, this is troublesome, but if he doesn't attack, will the others suspect something? Fake Mashamu shouted for the frog to come, and he would deal with it now. The rest of the heroes moved forward. Shachiku said that in this labyrinth, there are bosses every 5 floors. They need the boss of the 5th underground level. All the others should just pass. Raspy wondered how to capture dungeons. Kira said that they did the same thing the day before yesterday, but it was much easier than with the spiders. The timer shows 2 minutes and 4 seconds. The 5th underground level. A huge stone golem stood before the comrades. Shachiku said that the stone golem was their main target now. The monster itself was enormous, and its defense and physical strength were simply top-notch. Such a powerful opponent would be too much for beginners, but with the strongest wooden stick, one blow would be enough. The protagonist struck the golem. The subquest, the enormous labyrinth of Falsula, aimed to defeat the stone golem. Everyone watched the hero with their mouths open. Raspy thought that this wooden stick was simply incomparable. Shachiku said that they defeated the golem, which is why it dropped 12 stones and a diamond. It seems the goddess of random numbers is in a good mood today. Shachiku said that 180 of these stones would be needed to restore the houses and walls of the village. They simply needed to collect the items, and then they could multiply the amount using a glitch. But for now, the comrades simply needed to collect the 3 types of dropped items, so they had to keep killing stone golems over and over again. Kira asked if the protagonist had already killed one golem. Denia said the dungeon was filled with miasma, but they'd have to wait at least until tomorrow because the monsters wouldn't regenerate that quickly. The protagonist said that the frying pan's trump card would now be revealed. He said they needed to go up to the 4th level. The underground 4th level. There was a chest and a stove there. The protagonist said there was a chest containing recovery items and a stove for cooking. Games often feature locations where you can simply regenerate before a boss fight. Fake Mashamu asked why such places were even necessary. Fake Eriha replied in case Shachiku got hungry. Shachiku suggested they start quickly. He said that if he kept adding and removing the frying pan from his inventory, the system would start to overload. Everyone looked at the protagonist in disbelief. Fake Eriha asked if Shachiku was okay. Denia couldn't believe the protagonist had managed it again. He repeated the same motion over and over. At one point, it looked like he was holding the frying pan, but not quite holding it. Simply put, the frying pan had split in 2. Kira asked, split in 2? Denia asked how this was different from the multiplication bug. The cooking command in this game only allows you to cook food items. The doubling state allows you to cook gold coins, which should essentially be impossible. Kira asked again, what? Quickly fried gold coins along with brightly colored vegetables. The girls wondered if the protagonist had cooked coins. Raspy couldn't believe his eyes. Gold coins? Were these the same coins the protagonist had thrown at Arachne? The pile of coins in the frying pan was growing very quickly. Shachiku said that today's meal was ready. He had finished creating object 151 using the cooking bug. The girls were surprised, and Raspy didn't understand anything at all. Shachiku explained that data existed during development, but wasn't implemented in the finished game. This data is called hidden data. It may or may not cause a new bug. Graphics weren't specified, and that seemed to be why the error message was displayed. Denia asked, an error? Shachiku picked up the camera image and bit off a piece. He said, of course it's food, so it's edible. The girls were afraid for the protagonist and tried to stop him. They asked him to spit out everything he'd bitten off. Shachiku turned around and ran off again. He said that item number 151 would be eaten, and that they needed to return to the 5th underground level. Kira shouted for the protagonist to stop, but at the door, everyone noticed a new, large golem. The protagonist announced that the golem had revived. Shachiku explained that analysis of voluntary players showed that eating item number 151 doesn't cause in-game time to expire, but is treated by the system as if one day had passed. Shachiku struck the golem with his wooden stick again, hard. He said he no longer knew what use object 151 was supposed to have in the game, since it had never been implemented. However, if you eat it, the timer won't advance, and the day will already have passed. In another RTA, this was called cooking through time. The timer shows 3 minutes and 16 seconds. The protagonist said that with this trick, they could hunt the golem forever, and it would only take 1 day. They would continue this process until they collected the required stones and dropped items. Ideally, they would finish on the 15th circle. False Eriha shouted at Kira and Denia that they didn't understand a word of the protagonist's explanation. Kira turned and replied that they didn't understand a word of what he was saying either. But apparently, this wasn't an explanation, but rather a personal test of the RTA process. Raspy decided the protagonist was talking to himself. After 16 minutes, the timer showed 19 minutes and 13 seconds, and the heroes had 216 stones, 1 dragon claw opal, a silver fluorite, a diamond, and dwarven dice. In just 18 attempts, they had collected all the necessary materials. The protagonist said that they needed to use her item to return to the tent in the village. He asked Denia to do this. Denia was surprised, but she replied that she understood everything. She picked up the tambourine and teleported everyone to the tent in Tadanka village. When everyone had teleported, the timer showed 19 minutes and 53 seconds. Shachiku said they would leave the stones where they were for the materials. He said they had collected the materials for the village. Now all that was left was the labor force. He asked Denia to teleport everyone to the royal capital. Denia obediently did so. Raspi was scared and needed to quickly come up with a reason to stay in the village. Before Denia had teleported everyone, Mashamu had managed to ask the hero if it might be better if the squad stayed here and kept an eye on everything. But Denia had already named the location for the teleportation, the royal capital of Falshura. So everyone set off for the capital in a friendly crowd. Since the capital was protected by a monster barrier, a black slime splashed outside the capital during the teleportation. The soldier guarding the gates heard a strange sound, and when the soldier turned around, the black slime simply killed him. Raspi sat on the ground, licking his lips, and said that damn barrier had ruined everything. The royal capital of Falshura, the Adventurers Guild, Ida's shield. Kira couldn't understand where the other 3 team members had gone. Denia was rushing her friend because Shachiku had already escaped. Kira wondered if they were all supposed to teleport together. A new district of the city. The timer shows 20 minutes, 58 seconds. Guild of Masters, Gnomes Group. One of the dwarves sternly asked, "What are the heroes talking about?" The Guild of Craftsmen had a leader named Baron May. He said that the heroes had suddenly barged in and were asking to use his workers. He asked them not to talk nonsense, and he insulted the heroes. Baron said that only first-class carpenters work in this workshop. The walls of the capital were also the work of a team of dwarves. Even the famous castle of Falshura was built in a single night, but that's thanks to the ancestors of the current craftsmen. Baron sternly said they would only accept first-class work. They didn't need assignments from a pathetic little man like Shachiku. He asked him not to come to the guild again. Shachiku realized the conversation had dragged on. He asked what he needed to do to be considered first class. Baron shouted, "Does the hero have any brains?" He needed to think with his own little head. If he was an adventurer, he had to collect rare items himself. If he wanted to ask the dwarves for help, he'd need to collect a diamond or 2. Shachiku took a diamond from his backpack and showed it to the dwarf. The dwarf considered the fact that diamonds in these parts could only be obtained in the large labyrinth, and this guy was a real savant. Baron said that meant the hero already had courage, but if he was a first-class adventurer, he needed dwarven dice. Shachiku pulled the requested item from his bag again. The gnome said, "Silver fluorite, the protagonist has already got it." The dwarf named the opal Dragon's Claw, and the protagonist pulled everything out of the bag again. Baron couldn't understand how the protagonist could pull out items faster than he could name them. Maybe he can read minds? Shachiku smiled and said he simply saw right through the dwarf. Baron wondered if Shachiku had uncovered the dwarf's greatest secret, that they always bluff and act brazenly to avoid being bullied by humans. Baron replied that they would take the order. Shachiku asked, "What?" Baron said, "He acknowledges the hero." He said the protagonist could lead the dwarves to Tadanka village or anywhere else. He shouted for Shachiku to take everyone and go. This was the stubborn subquest, and the protagonist had completed it. Kira said they had given the dwarven construction team assignments. Shachiku replied that this was why they needed to complete the golem defeating laps and gather all the necessary items. The timer shows 23 minutes and 3 seconds. The protagonist said they should return to Tadanka village and asked Denia to do so. Denia replied that she was starting to get tired of it, but they set off for Tadanka again. When they landed, they couldn't believe their eyes. House frames were everywhere, and gnomes were running around. Kira said they'd only arrived here a second ago. Denia wondered when the gnomes had managed to build the frames. Shachiku replied that he'd set up a flag in advance, indicating that a team of gnomes would arrive soon. The materials had been prepared in advance. If you load the field with a matabi, you can see houses under construction. The gnomes said they would take on the construction of the village's main wall and the village hall. Shachiku replied that he would prepare the field. When the village was in ruins, he received a farmer's hoe. It was all very simple. You had to take one step to the side and rhythmically repeat the movements of the hoe. At first glance, everything might seem simple, but it's the ability to cut out unnecessary movements without breaking the rhythm that will affect the time. This is why the IN/over RTA tests the speedrunner's skill 100%. Kira said that after so many of these horrific movements, this one seems much more normal. Denia asked her friend to wake up as her mind was poisoned. Suddenly, a squad of silver dragon's fangs appeared. Denia asked where they had been. Fake Ariha said that many goblins were wandering around near the village. Kira thought about it. Fake Mashamu was surprised that while they were gone, work was in full swing. Denia replied, "Yes." At that moment, Shachiku approached and said he was finished with the field. He said that all that remained was to wait for the dwarves to finish their work. Denia reminded Shachiku that he had promised to restore the village in 30 minutes. But the dwarves wouldn't finish in 3 minutes. The timer showed 27 minutes and 2 seconds. Shichiku asked if he'd forgotten something. Dania couldn't believe her eyes. He was holding object 151 in his hand again. The protagonist said he prepared them in advance and in large quantities. The girls didn't believe he'd start eating those pictures again. Suddenly, it became dark. The protagonist said it was because new objects were loading. They'd have to wait a little longer. When it became light, the village was completely rebuilt. The timer shows 28 minutes, 37 seconds. The Tadanka village reconstruction subquest had been successfully completed. Everyone stood there with their mouths open. Shichiku said he was stopping the countdown. Kira said that couldn't be. Dania noticed that the dwarves were very tired and were sitting on the ground. The protagonist said it was a good result. The work took 28 minutes, compared to the planned 30 minutes. The reason for this victory was that he was able to reduce the number of approaches to 18, and he wasn't swamped by the random number game, thanks to a lucky drop from the stone golem. This is RTA. Raspi wondered what to do. He couldn't hold back any longer. His frantic face manifested in Eric's form. Shichiku didn't see anything because she stood behind him and continued talking. That, if there was an area to reduce, then the load on the system caused by the frying pan could ruin everything. The royal castle. About 2 kilometers from Tadanka village, Ain, in the form of a princess, stood on the balcony and looked through binoculars. He couldn't believe his eyes, but a new village was on the horizon. The soldier guarding the princess asked if everything was all right with Lady Ida. The princess asked for a carriage to be prepared. She wanted to go to Tadanka village. The princess added, "Right now." The soldier apologized and said that the Council of Sages would be held in the evening. The princess replied that the council was postponed. The main point had already been discussed that morning. She looked sternly at the soldier and told him to hurry and call all the villagers. The soldier ran off to carry out the order. Ain couldn't believe Shichiku had fulfilled his promise. Tadanka village. Raspi couldn't contain himself any longer. He wanted to devour the hero whole. He thought it would be better to eat all 4 of them at once. Since the opportunity presented itself, it would be tastier to fry the hero's confit style. Raspi stopped himself. He wondered if the protagonist, using RTA tactics, knew he was here. Shichiku thought he felt someone staring at him. He turned sharply and saw Ariha's distorted face. The protagonist called her name, and Raspi thought he knew it. The fake Ariha asked what's wrong. Shichiku asked if she was hungry. The fake Ariha had a drool running down her face and her eyes were wild. Shichiku set the table with a variety of delicacies. There was Tadan-style stew, pasta and vegetable casserole, a sandwich with crispy lettuce, fried mushrooms with medicinal herbs, roasted fossil bison, and a wild berry cake. None of the companions expected this. Kira asked if Shichiku had prepared all of this himself. The protagonist replied yes, but with the help of a cooking program. Kira asked if it was edible. Denia said she hoped there weren't fried gold coins inside. The protagonist explained that the food was made from simple ingredients. He bought them specifically to organize his inventory. He was surprised that the girls didn't believe him. The gnomes pounced on the food and devoured it all at breakneck speed. One of the gnomes said it was delicious. Denia asked if the gnomes would make any strange movements after eating. Shichiku replied that they wouldn't. He asked them to trust him. The false squad stood aside and remained silent. Raspi thought about how the protagonist hadn't yet revealed him. Kira turned to Ariha and said they should eat too. She'd already tried the food, and it was truly delicious, and there were no deviations. Raspi thought he'd completely forgotten about the strongest female warrior in the entire kingdom, Kirari Latifis herself. After all, she was just a human. False Ariha replied that she and her squad would join the meal as well. At that moment, the royal carriage entered the village. Denia and Shichiku went to meet it. Princess Ada emerged from the carriage. The heroes were very surprised by her presence. Ida said that Shichiku had done a wonderful job. Kira wondered if Ain himself had rushed to the viewing in such a hurry. His feelings were understandable. Kira said it was an honor to meet the princess in such a place. Ain couldn't take his eyes off her figure and replied that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Raspi was delighted that the princess herself had come here. The princess touched the walls of the houses and was surprised that they weren't made of papier-mâché. The protagonist replied that the group of gnomes had done their job properly. The princess whispered that she had to check everything because these houses were built as quickly as the royal castle. Ain thought the protagonist was still strange. He was becoming increasingly worried about his sister messing around with the hero. Shichiku was irritated that Ain didn't believe him, even now, and he was trying to please. The princess said Shichiku had laid the foundation for the village's restoration so quickly that it defied common sense. Ain whispered his gratitude to the hero. The protagonist smiled and replied, "You're welcome." The princess explained that she wasn't alone in coming to the new village. She had asked another important person to come. The princess announced that this woman was born in this village. Denia and Shichiku recognized her. It was the same old woman. She was carefully examining the village. The old woman replied that everything looked a little different than before, but these houses were made of stone. She said she was in a dream. The protagonist was delighted to have pleased the important guest. The old woman, without wanting to, noticed the detachment of 3 people who stood behind the hero. She noticed that the troop had blackness where their eyes should be. The old woman invoked the goddess's blessing of judging the real from the false. Instead of a squad, there was a large black ooze. The old woman screamed that danger was behind the hero, but Raspy reacted faster and opened his mouth to swallow the hero. Kira rushed toward Shachiku and pushed him to the ground. Raspy's enormous mouth bit off a chunk of the earth, not the hero. The protagonist was confused that Kira had saved him. Raspy was upset that he couldn't swallow the hero he desired. At that moment, a sword was held to his head. Kira struck the villain once in the eye and once in the chest. Raspy flew to the side. He then realized he had been struck and cursed. The old woman crouched beside the hero, and Kira stood before him. Shachiku was surprised at how quickly the wounds on the demon's body healed. Kira recognized the demon. One of Raspy's 4 kings of darkness? Denia was terrified. The soldier stood before Princess Ada. Raspy was delighted to be so popular with the people. He felt relieved. Kira knew Raspy was a dirty, swampy bastard. She wondered what his purpose was. Had he come to avenge Arachne? But why was Shachiku so surprised by the demon's appearance? She'd heard that, when Raspy devoured his victims, he could take away their appearance and memory. Kira cried out, "Could this demon have really devoured 3 members of a Silver Dragon's Fang team?" Raspy licked his lips and apologized. He said he was very hungry. Raspy wondered why this half-naked knight was so noisy. But the more impudent a person is, the more delicious their flesh. He licked his lips again and slowly walked toward the princess. Raspy said that with such a noisy knight, a leisurely meal would be impossible. Raspy held the hero's wooden stick in his hands. He asked if the protagonist would mind such a souvenir. Kira and Shachiku were surprised. Raspy extended his arms in greedy gestures and declared that he didn't want to return home empty-handed. Kira tried to figure out who she was protecting. She struck the hand that was reaching for Denia. The other hand covered the princess's mouth and dragged her away. The old woman said she couldn't believe what was happening. Raspy had captured Princess Ada. He wondered why a warrior woman would choose to protect a cat, but then he dismissed the thought. Raspy turned to the hero and said that he hadn't yet given up on the main course. This is the RTA tactic that resides in the hero's mind. Raspy created a huge black hole for teleportation. He shouted at the hero that if he wanted to get the princess back, he had to jump into a huge muddy swamp. If Shachiku arrived too late, he would eat the princess. The black hole in the sky closed and the sky became bright. Kira shouted after the demon to stop. Silence fell over the village as everyone pondered what to do next. The protagonist pondered what had just happened. One of the demons named Raspy had emerged from his filthy swamp and appeared here. He had stolen the most powerful wooden staff and taken with him the NPC Ain, who shouldn't have even been in the game. Such a scenario didn't exist in the original. Denia had confirmed the protagonist's thoughts by calling him. She had shouted that they must save Ain. If they were late, the demon would definitely eat him. While Shachiku was pondering this, Kira had approached and said she was against it. Kira asked the protagonist to answer honestly about the attack. She asked if the attack had been unexpected even for him. The protagonist remained silent. Kira thought about how the protagonist had never been at a loss in such situations before. She had said that the battle with this slime wasn't part of the main plot of RTA. Raspy had managed to take the precious wooden staff with him. Kira didn't believe that a hero from another world, who came once every 100 years, was ready to die such a stupid death. Kira said they would go there only if they were perfectly prepared, even if they lost time. She added that shadow warriors were needed for such moments. Denia didn't know what to do. The protagonist looked at her silently, unable to offer anything. He admitted that the arrival of this demon had surprised him, but he knew of its existence. Raspy is a hungry, muddy swamp. Since it had returned to its refuge, it meant they had found the right route. The chances of victory were high. The protagonist said that all this was thanks to Kira's attack. She was surprised. Shachiku said that the most powerful staff could not be obtained again, and he regretted it. But there were other ways to defeat Raspy. Shachiku admitted that he looked very pathetic, but this time he would return everything stolen. He said in a cheerful voice that they would immediately set off to save Ain. He promised to do it at the speed of sound. Denia looked at the hero trustingly. Kira thought the protagonist hadn't changed. She said that if they went to the hungry muddy swamp, they would have to cross the southern part of the continent, namely the Dragon Tail mountain range. It would take 2 weeks to circumnavigate the range by land. The further they traveled from the royal capital, the stronger the demons they would encounter along the way. Even if they tried to fly over the mountains, the altitude would be enormous, even for a griffin. Shachiku said there was no need to worry about this. There was a perfect technique for eliminating bugs. It was a glitch that worked perfectly in 100% of RTAs. Denia asked, "What?" The protagonist replied that if they went through the reverse world, they could arrive at the muddy swamp in just 15 minutes. The timer was all zeros. The girls were surprised. The reverse world?